Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our Market Performance and Planning Forum. My name is Brenda Marquez. On behalf of the California ISO Stakeholder Affairs Group, we welcome you to the ISO if it is your first time, as well for those who are visiting and our stakeholders who are here today. We would like to go over some few housekeeping reminders for those who are here, and also we'll cover the ones for the virtual attendees. We do see a few coming in on site and also virtual, so during my beginning part, we'll kind of go over the high level housekeeping reminders. So this is a quarterly forum that engages stakeholders in review of market performance issues at a high level. And especially we do cover release planning. That'll be happening around the afternoon. We also will be covering any new market enhancements and topics with market performance. We also will be sharing ideas and having open dialogue. So we welcome both raised hands and also those in the audience today. This call is being recorded for informational and convenience purposes only. Any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. So we do encourage comments. Please refrain from repeating any comments. We could definitely circle back in offline discussion if needed, but we definitely welcome comments throughout the presentation when the speakers have paused for questions. For those who are on site, we welcome you to take advantage of our complimentary breakfast. We do have coffee and a little bit of orange juice and everything, so we definitely encourage those folks who are online, if they ever want to come to one of our in-person meetings, we definitely do our best to accommodate. So yesterday we did have the RIS Fair, the Resource Interconnection Standards Fair, so it was a really great turnout, and we definitely encourage a lot of meetings coming up later this year and next year. For those who are on site, please wear your ISO badge at all times when walking through the hallways. It's especially important for our ISO staff and employees to identify who's walking around and just make sure for your security purposes. For Wi-Fi, we do have ISO guests. Feel free to set the conditions to use. As well, we have outlets available underneath your desk for those people who are here. Attendees are welcome to use the space during lunchtime, as well as use the cafe downstairs. And then we will also have an announcement. If you do wish to do an ISO tour, please email us in advance to visit iso@caiso.com in order for us to make sure there's someone who could provide that tour for your organization, as well for your group that would like to come at a specific date and time. So those who are on site, thank you so much for coming. We do have microphones located in front of you. Those microphones will turn on once you click the first button and it'll turn green. Before stating a question, please be sure to say your full name and affiliation before making your comment. My event producer is Ahmed, and he'll be helping us today, and then I'll be helping as facilitator. At this point, we'll go over the virtual attendees. For those online, you will use the raise hand icon located in the lower toolbar. You'll hear a beep sound. Once you're unmuted, you'll be able to say your full name and affiliation, and those who are dialed in only the phone line will use *3. Please be sure to state your full name and affiliation for those who are in the virtual attendees, because we do not able to know who's speaking, but it'll be great for us to understand who's having the question. And if you do have a chat question, we welcome you to add your organization title or your organization company name as well to kind of track the question back to you. For today's objective, we do have plans of discussing and clarifying timelines, also focusing on implementation planning and discuss external impacts. And lastly, policy discussions that would occur during the initiative stakeholder process. So a lot of the discussion you'll hear today will have a lot of updates, initiatives that are going on right now, and that will be happening in the afternoon with Becky Robinson. And then we'll have a little bit of information with release planning with Tringvo on the implementation and about the market simulation and any updates happening within that initiative targeting implementation. Today's agenda will cover this morning with market performance update with Guillermo, and this will cover also with short-term forecasting with Rebecca Webb, and then we'll cover through that for about noon, and at noon we'll take a lunch break from noon to 1 and return back for policy updates with Becky Robinson for market policy development, and then we'll wrap things up with release updates for Tringvo. And at this time, I'll go ahead and introduce Guillermo, who will be helping go over the slides. And Guillermo, you're the Director of Market Performance and Analysis. If you can clarify it's a long title, I want to make sure. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to have this discussion, and welcome to those that could attend in person. This is our regular quarterly discussion that we have about the market performance, and we have a variety of topics that we would like to discuss this morning. We have actually the agenda available in the deck, and hopefully we are able to go through these topics. These topics are chosen because they are timely to the events that are happening right now in the market, such as the summer conditions, right? How are we doing with the summer? Then we have a couple of updates regarding recently implemented policy enhancements. One of those that we implemented back in August 1st. We want to provide an update how the market is performing after we have implemented those changes. Then we go into an area that we discussed as part of the BidCap policy discussions back in May regarding a potential enhancement to what we call the shaping factors. This is an internal calculation that we have to estimate what we call the maximum import bid prices, and they are used for basically the increase of the bid cap from 1,000 to 2,000. Then we are going to move into some topics that are more related to operational conditions. One of those is the load conformance. This is a topic that we have been discussing now for some time, given the interest of how we apply load conformance in the market and the implications that this has on the market performance. We are going to move into a brief discussion of the update that we have on the utilization of transfer limitations. That is a practice that we implemented last summer. We want to give you an update how we are doing with that for this summer. Then we move into a data-related topic that is regarding the storage resources. We currently published a report regarding the performance of storage, and we have received a lot of inquiries about getting access to the underlying data. Then we move to the topic of oversupply and renewable production. Typically, we have a lot of activity in this area in the shoulder months when we have plenty of solar production, relatively mild loads, and we have this condition of reduction of production of renewable resources. From there, we move into the update of the flexible ramping product. This is a standard update that we provide. There has been some changes that we have implemented in the recent time, and we want to provide some briefing of how that is working. Then we move into a topic of load and renewable forecast. There has been a couple of changes that were implemented recently, and also how the conditions play for so far in the summer. And the last three topics are kind of a standard topics that we don't have really brand new information. It's simply an update of the current performance. Storage resources is a very interesting topic to see how it's performing over time, and we just want to provide this update trends of how storage resources are doing. We also have the topic of the gas and bilateral power trends. We typically provide that information, and together with that, we also discuss the wholesale costs related to the operation of the market. It's standard metrics that we can see how they are accruing over time. And the last part, we don't go into an explicit discussion of those. These are just standard metrics for your information, just to see specific areas of the market. If there are any specific questions to that area, we will be able to entertain that, but we don't expect to cover explicitly that last section. And with that in mind, I think we can be hopeful to be able to complete this in less than 3 hours for the morning session. Will I be able to see the hand? Okay. Where will they show up? Okay. Okay. Sure. Thank you. With that, let's start straight into the first topic, and that is how are we doing for the summer conditions? You may recall since the events of the summer 2020, the CAISO undertook this initiative for more transparency and more timely dissemination of the performance of the market. And we have been publishing monthly summer reports for basically the periods of June through September, just to provide that information of how we are doing along the line of all the improvements that we have implemented in the last 3-4 years for dealing with the summer readiness conditions. And similar to previous years, we are covering in today's discussion effectively the performance of June and July, and we are in preparation for the August report that is scheduled to be posted somewhere at the end of this month. And we are also expecting to produce the performance report for September. You may recall that September happens to be typically, at least for the recent years, the most interesting time for the summer, at least in the CAISO in the West, because that is when we really hit the peak load conditions. And this year is not that different. The peak was reached in the first days of September. But for the purpose of this discussion, I would like to focus mainly on the July performance, how we were doing for this month. And the loads in the CAISO area were relatively moderate. The interesting part is that when you look at holistically across the West, it happens to be the warmest July in record. And that really drove the high loads in the Western interconnection, what we call the WEC. So we indeed broke a record for the peak condition across the WEC. And we reached a total peak of 167 gigawatt, slightly higher than the previous record that was observed back in 2022. This representation is just trying to show you the distribution of the load levels for the last few years across the summer months. Each month is capturing one single trend. These trends are no more than the distributions of the peak values of the WEC. And you have the matrix of the years versus the months. And the color code is simply to tell you the level of the demand. The more red, the darker, the higher the load. The more blue, the lighter, the lower the demand level. And you can see how every single point of the demand for that month happened to be distributed for that specific month. And this is no more than a density distribution of all the samples of the demand taken for that specific month. And typically, you're going to see that we have the standard tails of the distribution, right? The tails really tell you the extreme values, the lowest, the highest. And when you look at on the right-hand side, the tail on the right-hand side, you're really looking at the distribution, the few hours where we reach the highest level of the demand. The darker the red, the highest the demand level. And when you put in perspective the July for 2024, that with the second column, the lower distribution, you're really looking at the distribution that we observed for July 2024. And there are very interesting ways to interpret this information. You can see first that the tails are not very long. They are pretty sharp slope. And that basically means that you have a lot of high-level points on the distribution. It was not just one single outlier hour that happens to break the record. You have a lot of high demand hours in the month of July. And if you compare that against any of the other months, you can see that it's not dramatically higher, but high enough to be a new record so far for the WEC interconnection. We have a similar distribution to highlight how the CAISO-specific load behaved for the month of July. Even though across the West we have these record temperatures, the temperatures in the areas where the demand is concentrated in the CAISO system were not that extreme, and therefore the demands in the CAISO area were more moderate. If you keep in perspective, for instance, the peak that we observed in July, we were in the range of 45,000 megawatts. The record peak that we had a couple of years ago was in the range of 52,000 megawatts. So it's about 7,000 megawatts lower than the historical peak we have observed for the CAISO area. Similar distribution we have for the last 10, 11 years for the critical months of the summer. And in the same fashion, the distributions on each month tells you how high, how low, and how frequently these demand levels were observed for each of the months. And the same way, on the right-hand side, when you see the tails, you can see how high the demand can go. And specifically for this month of July 2024, you can see that it is within the typical range. It's not something extraordinary that we observe for the CAISO area. If you just move the focus a little bit and you go back, for instance, to the month of September 2022, you can see how higher that value is, how longer the tail of that distribution is when we observe actually the record peak for the CAISO system. If you make that comparison against the July 2024, you can see how far we were still from the last peak record that we have in the system. Let me move now into some areas of the actual market performance. And at the end of the day, it's not only how high the demand is, but also how well equipped we are to handle that level of demand. Specifically, how much supply we can count. We have this resource adequacy capacity, that is the contracted capacity to be able to meet our peak. And we keep track of how much of that supply capacity was coming and available into the market. In the first plot, what you have is the comparison of what was the forecast used to determine the level of the resource adequacy capacity that was needed for the month versus the daily peaks that we have for the month of July in the CAISO system. And you can see that through the month of July, we were coming close to that forecast that was used for the resource adequacy. It didn't exceed that level, but in the dates of July 23rd, 24, we were pretty close to hit that specific CEC forecast. On the lower part, you have a different comparison, and that is the trend, the line in green, stands for all the resource adequacy capacity shown. That is the monthly values that are scheduled to come, they were contracted, and that is the capacity that we are going to account for. And in the bars, you have the load obligation, how much load we have for that specific period. The bars in blue stand for the forecast, this is the actual demand, how much demand we have, and the little portion in red on the top is the load obligation that comes as part of the operating reserves. At the end of the day, we need to have enough resource adequacy capacity to be able to meet our actual load plus our reliability obligation that is coming as operating reserves. When you put that obligation together and compare that against the resource adequacy capacity that we have available, you can see we were coming with a healthy margin. We were never even really close to hit the resource adequacy showing level. And that means that the levels of demand that we have in the system were moderate enough that the resource adequacy capacity was sufficient to meet that obligation. When it comes to the resource adequacy, we keep track also how that is evolving from year to year, from month to month. As we progress towards the heavy part of the summer, we expect to see higher levels of resource adequacy. When you compare June versus July, it is expected that we're going to have a higher level of resource adequacy, and that's the case here. But also, when you compare between years, you can see that there is a marginal increase in the total resource adequacy capacity that we have from 2023 to 2024. And that is highly predicated on the forecast of the demand that we have used as a reference for contracting the resource adequacy. When you look at the composition of the resource adequacy, there are different technologies, different resources providing that resource adequacy, and we group that into the different technologies, just to see how the technologies are supporting that array capacity. And there are pluses and minuses. In the first part, you can see that there is a moderate decrease in the resource adequacy supported by gas resources in the range of 3,400 megawatts. And at the same time, we have an increase of resource adequacy supported by storage resources. Basically, that offsets each other. We have about 3,600 megawatts of resource adequacy now additionally supported by storage resources. Imports move up a little bit, hydro deck a little bit, so overall it's a relatively constant value of the resource adequacy. It's just interesting to see how the different technologies mix change from year to year. Now, based on the monthly showings of the resource adequacy, we see that we have enough capacity to be able to meet our load obligation. As we go closer and closer to the actual operation of the system, that resource adequacy may change slightly because there may be outages in the system, there may be other conditions happening, and we have a closer view to the actual capacity that eventually make it into the market. Basically, we take all the information that goes into the day-ahead market. That is the most accurate representation of the total resource adequacy capacity that is available to run and clear the market. And we compare that against our load obligation. And we want to see how close we were to be able to meet our load obligation with that resource adequacy capacity. We also track the other portion of the supply that is coming into the market that is not resource adequacy contracted. There are still capacity available in the market that is not under RA contracts, and they are willing to participate in the market economically. We keep track of that portion. That portion indeed is represented here with the area in green. The blue is the resource adequacy capacity, the portion in green is the non-resource adequacy capacity. And that gives you just volume-wise a perspective, how close we were to exhaust all the resource adequacy capacity to the point that we may have to rely on the non-RA capacity. Given the moderate levels of demand that we have for July, you can see, at least for the most critical days, in July 23 to 25, that just the resource adequacy capacity was enough to meet our load obligations. There are different trends in the load component, defined by the lines. It is one to represent just the load forecast. The other one is when we add all the day-ahead adjustments. These are basically increases to the demand forecast to account for any uncertainty that we project to have in the system. And we want to see if we have enough supply to be able to meet not only that load forecast, but also that additional adjustment to account for the uncertainties. And there is also another line, that is the dotted line, that in addition to the load obligation and the ROC adjustments for uncertainty, it also accounts for the self-scheduled exports. There are certain constructs that we have in the market for those exports that have contracted non-RA capacity to be able to be supported with that capacity that basically are expected to flow. And we want to see if even with that capacity, we're able to sustain with the available supply that is in the system. Short story, for the month of July, we did have plenty of supply, resource adequacy, plus non-RA capacity to be able to meet all these load obligations. Moving on to prices. This stands for the last 2 months of the price trends. And each line stands for one of the markets, the integrated forward market, the day ahead, and the 15 and the 5-minute market, the real time. In the upper part, you have the daily trend, how prices evolve from the beginning of June towards the end of July. And as we progress with higher demand throughout the month of July, you can see naturally the prices increasing accordingly, to the point where we see some price excursions happening in the period of July 23, 24, 25th. That is when we have the tightest conditions of supply and demand in the CAISO area. And you want to see this in a different perspective and look at the hourly profile through the day in the month, how that set of prices move along. The lower part gives you that hourly trend. You can see, for instance, June was pretty quiet. On average, the prices were most of the time below $50. These are monthly average per hour. While in the month of July, you can see that prices naturally tend to increase for the peak hours, and they reach up to $200 for hour ending 19/20. These are when we have the tightest conditions for the month of July. Relatively speaking, even those prices are moderate given all the conditions that we have. When we look at the real-time market, we can also look at more holistically. We have not only the CAISO area, but also each of the other 22 balancing areas that composed the Western Energy Imbalance Market. To simplify the 23 different areas trending here, we aggregate those by regions. We have the Pacific Northwest, the Mountain Central area, the California area, and the Desert Southwest. Each of those are represented with a line here, just to give you a sense of the regional dynamics of the prices over this period of time. And you can see that they trend close one to another. There are some natural variations, geographic variations are expected given the demand and the transmission available across the different areas. And the interesting part is that in general, they follow pretty close the same trend that we observe for California, increasing towards the end of July when we have the tightest condition in the system. Just a reminder, as we discussed at the beginning, even though California didn't have an extreme high load, the WEC in general did have. So it is expected that there were tighter demand conditions across the West. And the prices are going to reflect that. And if you look at the specific, the 3 days of interest, July 23rd through July 25th, you can see that during the peak hours, ending 18 through 20, 21, even prices in other regions of the WEC also observe these higher prices. Typically, you are going to see that it's going to have a regional difference. In this case, for the month of July, you can see that the Pacific Northwest and the Central relatively stay low in comparison to the California and the Desert Southwest, where prices were higher. And that is just a reflection of the regional dynamics of the system. One of the areas that we also keep track is the level of capacity that is no longer available that was under the resource adequacy construct. Outages happen all the time. It is expected, and even when we have these extreme temperatures is when you may start to see even higher volume frequency of outages. This just gives you a glance of the typical range of resource adequacy capacity that had outages in the system. Basically, they were not available because of the outages. And you can see that it's a steady trend. It's in the range of anywhere between 4,000 to 6,000 megawatts of capacity on outage. That is a typical range that we have observed across the different summers of the CAISO system. And this is also broken down by technology, just to highlight where the majority of that volume of outages is happening. One of the resource adequacy areas that we also keep track is the resource adequacy import. There is certain capacity that is procured through the import. They are coming through our interties. These are non-resource specific imports. And there is an expectation that when they come to participate in the market, they are going to be bidding at zero or below zero prices. In some cases, they can actually put self-schedule, that is, strictly speaking, below an economical bid. This trend gives you the perspective of how the resource adequacy imports participated in both the day ahead and the real-time market. And the two levels of blue stand for whether they are self-scheduled, the dark blue, or they have an economic bid at zero or below zero, that is the light blue. And when you look at for the whole month, effectively, all the resource adequacy imports were able to be meeting their expectation of bidding at or below zero. There were also a couple of trends in this plot that show how much of that capacity actually was clear in the market. One thing is that that capacity is made available, it is bid into the market, and then how much of that the market actually is able to clear. You can see that the trend, the line at the very top, is basically constant for basically all the time, with the exception of a couple of days at the end of July. These lines in red that are lower than the upper value of the shaded area stand for values of resource adequacy imports that were not able to clear in either the day ahead or the real time. And it happened because we have an event, and that is related to the park fire that happened somewhere towards the end of July. to the point that at some level, the intertie that was carrying that imports have to be reduced, derated. And obviously, even though the bids were there, it just could not flow because it was derated up to 600 and some megawatts. Still, the RA imports were able to bid as expected. It's up to the market to utilize that capacity based on the conditions that it's dealing with, in this case, the derate of the intertie.
Guillermo, I have a question. Right, Andrew Meditz with SMUD.
Yes.
I thought, and it's been a while since I've looked at the RA imports requirements, but I thought they were required to bid in at $0.
I think the provision is to self-schedule, that effectively is anything below an economical bid, or at 0 or below 0.
So there was 0.6% that bid above 0.
Let me come back. Yeah, 9.4, yeah, 0.6% didn't bid at or below 0, somewhere a positive economic price.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Michelle, we can take your question. I see she's on mute.
Ahmed, can you go ahead and unmute Michelle?
Hey, this is Michelle from the CPUC. I just wanted to clarify that it's only CPUC jurisdictional entities with non-resource specific imports that need to bid at 0 or self-schedule. Non-CPUC jurisdictionals can schedule their RA imports however they choose. I just wanted to make that clarification.
Yes, thank you, Michelle. And we put that explicitly in the report. That is only CPUC jurisdictional arrays. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, let me move to the next topic, and that is the trends of the intertie construct that we have in the market. Part of our supply mix accounts for the interties, either imports or exports, and we tend to see certain trends over time. For the month of June, we can see that the levels of imports and exports were relatively within typical ranges. As we progress towards July, we could see naturally the level of exports increasing. So our area, the CAISO area, was supporting quite a lot of export volumes during the month. And if you compare, for instance, in the lower side, we have the prices, the CAISO prices versus the bilateral prices. The bilateral prices, we can take the reference of the Palo Verde, the Mid-C points, and compare those against the applicable CAISO prices. In this case, we are looking, for instance, at the SCE, that is the southern part of the system price, versus the PV bilateral price, the Palo Verde. And in general, you can see that the bilateral prices were higher than the CAISO prices. This is a typical economical opportunity that we expect that the CAISO is going to be able to support level of exports because it's economic. When you look at the trend that is in the upper part, there are different colors to show the different breakdowns of the exports. There are different types of exports that we have in the system, whether they are economically participating with a price quantity, whether they are self-scheduling with high or low priority. There is a portion that indeed are associated with the existing transmission rights, that they don't participate economically, just take into account that capacity. And the dominant color is yellow, and that refers to exports that were self-scheduled, low priority, but they were coming straight from the day-ahead market. They tried to put those in the day-ahead market to secure higher priority as we come into the real time and have more chances to be able to clear in the real-time market. If you look at the high of the bars, in some cases, these are easily over 9,000 megawatts. That is the level of the export that the system was able to support, given the fact that there was plenty of supply available in the system and the load levels were moderate in the CAISO area. This is a different breakdown. This is what we call the net schedule interchange. It's the total balance of imports and exports, supply versus demand on the interties. And there is one line, the trending in yellow, that stands for the net between the positives, the imports, and the negatives, the exports. Just to tell you, right, because you may be exporting 10,000 megawatts, but if you're importing 10,000 megawatts, it's washed out. So when you look at the total balance, is really what matters for the power balance of the CAISO system. In general, we're going to have a positive balance, meaning we have more imports than exports, and the net interchange is going to be positive. There are a few days, and they happen to be around July 9, 10, and also around July 16, 17, where the level of exports were higher than the total level of imports into the system. So in those cases, the CAISO area was in a net export position. And you can see through the month, the level of the exports really vary based on all the conditions that we see. It's not surprising to see these levels of exports in the period of July 9, 10, when we have these tighter conditions, as well as later in the second part of the month. The other area regarding interties is about the will-through transactions. The will-through transactions are these pairwise import, matching, and export in which they have to be in balance. Basically, just wheeling through our system, maybe from Malin going through Palo Verde, is passing through the system. They don't add or subtract supply or demand to the system. It's just utilizing the transmission system to be able to flow through. And there were some changes implemented for this summer in terms of determining the level of capacity that can be associated with a high priority level. And participants can still come and economically participate. They can economically put in wheels through, or they can self-schedule, and they are going to be given the low priority. The high priority are the ones that have to go through a whole process before reaching the point of getting into the market. For the month of July, these high priority wheel through were up to 690 megawatts. That is what was assessed in preparation for the day-ahead market. When it came to actually participating in the market, basically most of that was able to come into the market. About 680 out of 690 were actively using that high priority wheels to come into the market. And given the conditions that we have for the month of June and July, there were no reductions. There were not curtailments of these wheel-through transactions at all through these 2 months of transactions. Now, as we go from the day-ahead market into the real-time market, conditions are going to change. There is an expectation that exports, imports coming into the day-ahead market are going to be assessed based on the conditions that are known in that time frame. An export, an import that is clear in the day ahead have the opportunity to self-schedule with that higher priority into the real time, and they are going to secure a higher priority, getting more chances to be able to clear and flow through in the real time. When we go into the real-time market and see effectively how much of these exports have to be reduced because there was not enough supply to be able to support all those levels of exports, there were very few days in which the market has to actively reduce the level of exports that were coming into the market. Specifically, we have the most significant level of reductions of exports on July 24th, and that is the single line that you see there reaching over 900 megawatts. That was composed basically by economic bids and self-schedules, low priority. And just to put some reference, back in the summer of 2023, we ran into some complications because we have a lot of challenges to handle the exports. There was one critical day, for instance, where we were scheduled to reduce about 4,800 megawatts of exports, and about a half of those didn't follow through. Effectively, they were still trying to flow, even though the instruction was to not flow. We implemented a couple of enhancements back in November 2023 to close that door to ensure that if there is an instruction to reduce the export, that reduced export is actually what is flowing rather than the original self-schedule. I have to say that once we have implemented those changes back in November, and we now have this event where we require some exports to reduce, we did see those exports basically flowing up to the value that was reduced. That is working as intended. There was one wrinkle there that I will explain later, where there was some confusion about the priority of an export that created some unintended outcome in the value that eventually was able to flow into the system. But overall, the takeaway from here is that the changes and the enhancements implemented back in November 2023 are working properly, and we see that when there are export reductions issued by the market, they are being followed by the market participants. At the end of the day, there may be certain levels of demand, supply available, and prices. All of these come together and can be rationalized in the level of the wholesale cost that we see happening in the CAISO market. We maintain this trend in each of the summer reports just to give you a sense of how pricey, how expensive the operation of the wholesale market was for the CAISO area. And you can expect to see that for the month of July, when we have higher demands, higher prices, the cost is going to naturally increase accordingly. And on average, we are talking about a daily cost of $43 million of the wholesale CAISO market. And there are other components of that cost, like the congestion and energy offset that we also keep track. They may be spiking in certain days given how well the convergence between the day ahead and the real-time market happen. But overall, I would say that up to July, the costs are quite reasonable in the lower range of the spectrum. The last piece for the summer performance is the tracking of one feature that we implemented to the Western Energy Imbalance Market. This is a real-time feature. And the feature consists of allowing entities to rely on additional transfers even when they may have failed the resource efficiency evaluation. The typical construct is that when an entity is going to be participating in the real time, the first step is to ensure that they have enough capacity to be able to meet their own obligations. And that is achieved through the resource efficiency evaluation, the flexible ramping test, the capacity test. Once they are able to ensure that they have enough capacity to meet their own needs, now there is open participation in the real-time market. However, when an entity fails one of the tests, the consequence is that they are limited in the participation of the real-time market. They cannot rely on certain level of transfers beyond what was already clear. And when there are critical conditions and there may be supply available somewhere else in the system, there may be an opportunity to still provide additional transfers to those entities that failed the test. And that was the whole purpose of having this feature implemented. Effectively, any entity can decide whether they want to opt in to participate in this program that is called Assistant Energy Transfers. And when they are opted in, effectively what the market is going to be doing is that even if they fail the resource efficiency evaluation, they will be able to have additional transfers if they are available. There are some settlement implications because now they have to be settled in certain way. And the trend that you see here for the month of June and July is telling you with each color square the days in which any of these listed entities opted in. Effectively, if you see a color for any of these 10 different entities, that means on that specific day, that entity has opted in. And then there are markers that may or may not overlap with these colors. The markers stand for instances and days where the entity actually failed the resource efficiency evaluation. So these are the cases that really the program is useful because they have opted in, and if they fail, now they can really leverage on the opportunity to gain additional transfers. So the cases of interest here are going to be those that have a color with the market overlapping because they failed the test, but they have opted in. They can leverage on the opportunity to get additional transfers in the real-time market. I would say this month of July 2024 is the month with the highest participation of energy imbalance market participants opting in for this program. It's about 10 different entities that opted in, including the CAISO. Prior months, prior year, they have been something lower than that, in the range of 4 to 5 entities. This July was up to 10 different entities. And in some cases, you can see they were consistently opting in for every single day of the month. And I see one more, I think it's a new hand, right? Moderator, can we open the line for Michelle, please?
Hey, this is Michelle again. Hey, on slide 21, you showed that you had low priority wheel through transactions in July, in particular at the end of July. What ties were those low priority transactions, low priority wheel throughs coming from?
I don't have that in front of me, Michelle, but in the report, we provide a matrix that basically tells you the combination of sources and sinks for the wheel through. I will refer you to that first matrix. I didn't put it in the presentation, but it is in the report.
And just to clarify, it shows the matrix for low priority transactions in addition to high priority?
Yes, there should be one for high and one for low.
Okay, great. Because I just wanted to just make sure that on those days that the RA imports weren't getting on in Malin, that we weren't clearing low priority wheel throughs on Malin. Can you confirm that?
I think you're referring to the scenario where we have the rate on Malin that was around July 26, 27, and not all the RA imports could flow, right?
Right.
So your question is if those reductions of imports were after any reductions of the wheel through.
That's
I
right.
will have to confirm if we have wheel through on Malin that flow on that day. Now, as you may recall, Michelle, there are some nuances and complications on making this because it's not just a straight conclusion. There are combinations of conditions that need to happen for that relative priority to take place. And the complexity is that the wheel-through transaction is defined with an import plus an export altogether, and that is what defines the priority of the wheel-through. They are going to be side to side under the same basis as long as there is also power balancing feasibility in the CAISO. That is what really makes them to be at the same level field. If there is no power balancing feasibility in the market, effectively, it is a comparison of one import versus one import plus an export, and they are not really at the same level field.
Right. I know. I've been going over this for some time. So basically, if we have a D-read on a transmission line, we're going to support low priority wheels until we send CAISO into infeasibility. And that's my understanding of the penalty parameters, which seems kind of wrong to me. That we would prioritize low priority imports over RA imports until we literally send ourselves into an infeasibility because of the penalty parameters. And I've tried to confirm this a number of times and I haven't really gotten a very good response, but I think your response just now does confirm what I'm saying.
Yeah, and it goes back to the point of how you can compare wheels versus a transaction that is composed of two elements versus a transaction that is only one single element. And yeah, I think we have gone through that discussion a few times now.
Okay, but I do still find that somewhat troubling that, we pay for the RA imports and the purpose is to ensure reliability, but then we prioritize wheel throughs over those RA imports. So I guess I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Yeah, point taken, Michelle. Thank you. Okay, let me move forward where we were. Yeah, and I think that's really the content of the first part. Now, another area of transparency that we have improved as part of this summer efforts has to do with the challenges and the areas of improvement that we have identified. And for this specific month of July, we have 3 areas that we have identified that things didn't work very well or they can be improved. And I would say in the grand scheme of things, they are relatively minor items, but we want to provide the transparency because some of the participants may have been seeing the implications of this. The first one is that there was one day, specifically on July 4th, where you look at different data points on OASIS or through the different reports, we were reporting that there was a ROC infeasibility. Basically, the ROC process determined that we didn't have enough supply to meet all our demand. By the time we reach that power balance infeasibility, is only when we have exhausted any possible reductions, including what Michelle was indicating, reducing the exports to the point that we can balance our supply and demand. That didn't happen for that day. The market was going straight into a ROC infeasibility, power imbalance, rather than reducing first the low priority or even economical exports. That was not right, but create this perception that we were actually short of supply when in reality we were not. And we identified that issue and was fixed right away, basically for the next trading day. The second piece was a reporting issue. Participants can see information for their own position in this participant portal that is called the CMRI. And when participants were looking at their profile of imports and exports awards versus what could be on OASIS, or what actually was in the market, there were inconsistencies. They were being reported that there were export reductions, and they were not being reported in the participants' portal. And that created some differences between what the market was doing versus what they were seeing as the result. And that issue was also fixed on July 9. And the third issue, that is a little bit convoluted issue, and it has to do with how our system allocates the priority to the exports. There are some exports that are entitled to have the high priority condition because they have proved, they have shown that they have this non-array resource capacity that is able to support that export. When the participant goes and submits the export bid into the system, there are some check and balances to ensure that the identified resource is actually available and participating in the market to support that export, that the capacity that the export is claiming is be able to be supported with the capacity that is available on the resource. And that happens not only in the day-ahead market, but also in the real-time market. But the real-time market is somehow incremental to what was seen already in the day-ahead market. And here is where the complication happens, because there are many different permutations. There may be one resource bid in the day ahead is readjusted in the real time. There may be one case where there was nothing in the day ahead and now they show up in the real time. Under many different permutations, different validation rules are going to trigger. And the short story is that when there was a specific permutation of participation in the day ahead and then in the real time, that specific export basically was defaulted to low priority rather than the original high priority that should be entitled to have. And once that low priority was assigned in the bidding process, that priority is passed to the market. And the market is going to treat that export as a low priority rather than high priority. And the consequence is that if we are tight, well, there are going to be high chances that that export is going to be reduced in the real time because it's seen as low priority. That is the ultimate consequence of having this issue in the validation rules complication. So we have identified where that complication is happening, how different rules are triggering, and we are assessing how we can improve that logic to mitigate for this specific outcome. We don't have yet a specific date for implementation, but we expect to have this somewhere in the last quarter of this year.
Guillermo, Andrew Metzger again. Is that going to be a business rule change, or how is that going to? What's the process for implementation on that?
It will be the system is called Cyber. Is the system where participants can bid in their participation. So it's going to be a couple of changes to the specific validation rules in that application.
Okay, thank you.
And I think that's the first topic that we have. Before moving into the next area, I would like to see if there are any other questions. I don't see any hands raised. Okay, So I will pass it to Mihir.
All right, thanks. Morning, everyone. Mihir Shah, and I'm a market engineering specialist in the market analysis group within market performance and advanced analytics. I'm here today to talk about two items. The first is the price formation enhancements rules for bidding above the soft offer cap, and we've done some analysis on the performance of this rule that'll present that. And the second piece will be to present analysis on the performance of the current and proposed hourly energy shaping factor, particularly during the most recent heat wave that we just had in September, as well as a status update on the proposed enhancements and essentially where we are with that. Let me start with the rules for bidding above the soft offer cap. Let's review a little bit of the background behind these modifications first. It really essentially begins with the FERC Order 831 requirements, which require that a resource's bid be subject to the soft offer cap, but that any bids above the soft offer cap must be cost verified, and that those cost verified bids be capped at the hard offer cap of $2,000. And before August 1st, 2024 of this year, the bids were capped by the higher bids above 1,000 would be capped by the higher of 1,000 or the default energy bid. However, the default energy bids were also capped at 1,000. Now, the default energy bids represent a resource's marginal energy cost based on information that the ISO has, essentially meaning that the default energy bids are resource-specific verified costs, a form of cost verifying bids, but they were capped at 1,000. And so this is the key point. The second key point, which is not shown on the slide, but is that resources would have to have submitted reference level change requests to cost verify their bids above 1,000. But those were that functionality was not effectively available to energy storage resources and hydro resources. This is the other key point that is the driver for the modifications. So the two modifications are, one, to increase the cap on the default energy bids from 1,000 to 2,000, and two, is to modify the bid cap for energy storage resources such that they can have the bidding flexibility to bid above 1,000. These were made effective August 1st of this year, as I mentioned. Let's look at the first of these items, the increasing the default energy bid cap. The reasons behind or the implications for doing this are that it allows hydro resources to bid up to a value above 1,000 that reflects their opportunity costs, but as defined by their DEB. It also allows generating resources to bid up to a value above 1,000 to reflect their marginal costs up to their DEB value. And however, resources, for both of these resources would not have to take any action to verify these costs. But the DEB, if it was desired to raise the DEB further above that value, then resources would need to use the reference level change request or the RLCR process to adjust those DEBs. For instance, if there were some intraday costs that were being incurred, which is the existing process that we have currently. And now the scope of the increase to the default energy bid cap was for all the resources, both in the day-ahead and in the real-time markets. And again, the cap remains at 2,000 above 1,000. The formula here that shows the max of 1,000, the DEB, and the adjusted DEB is just a reflection of the increase in the bid cap. It's the max of 1,000 or the DEB if the DEB is higher than 1,000, and then the adjusted DEB if a reference level change request was submitted to further increase that DEB. Okay. The second of the modifications was the bid cap for energy storage resources. This was directed to battery storage resources in the real-time market. The DEB can go above 1,000 for these resources in conjunction with the previous enhancement as well. And then what's shown here is the formula that represents these rules. Is the maximum of the DEB, 1,000, the fourth highest real-time max import bid price, and any highest or any cost-verified bid submitted above 1,000. And so the max of these parameters would be setting the bid cap for the storage resources in the real time only. Okay. Those were the modifications. This slide presents a summary of the analysis of these new bidding rules and specifically targets the recent heat wave that we've had in September. So the first point is that for DEBs that were above 1,000, there was only one instance of that. I'll skip the second bullet and come back to that later. The third one, the storage bid cap, remained at $1,000. This is because none of the components were triggered to raise the bid cap above 1,000. There was still no DEBs for storage resources above 1,000. The fourth highest real-time max import bid price did not go above 1,000, and there was no cost verified bid that exceeded 1,000. For the second point on the energy bid ceiling, it did get raised to 2,000 on one day, which was September 5th, and we'll provide. I'll cover that when we get into the shaping factor stuff. We have a question.
Hey, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. Real quick, sorry, I had a question back on slide 30 when you were talking about the modification. So can you confirm, was the CAISO actually able to uncap the DEB for all storage resources? Because I know during the policy process, there was an implementation question that they couldn't uncap the DEB for storage resources that opted for the storage DEB. And so were they actually able to uncap it for all resources?
Thank you for that clarification. Yes, you are correct that there are two flavors of DEBs that storage resources can have. One is the storage DEB. The other one is essentially a cost-based DEB or a non-storage DEB. Let's just consider that. And due to the constraints around the timing around when we wanted to implement this, it was not possible to get the storage DEBs to be raised above 1,000, but non-storage DEBs, those could have been raised above 1,000.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you for the question. I don't see any more hands. Okay. Okay, this is where we were. So this now starts getting into the performance of these modifications. So let's tackle the first one, the raising of the DEB cap above 1,000. As I mentioned, there was only one instance where this happened. This was for a hydro resource where the DEB was raised above 1,000, and the DEB was driven by the opportunity cost adder, which applied for the entire month of August. The plot here shows that the DEB was raised above 1,000, both in the day-ahead and in the real-time market for the month of August. And then in September, there were no instances of DEBs above 1,000. I see a hand just popped up from Michelle. And the
Yeah, this is
moderator
Michelle.
unmute her.
Yeah, could you clarify, is this for a resource internal to the CAISO system? And is it based on an opportunity cost for the remainder of, it must have been an opportunity cost for September if it doesn't have an opportunity cost in September. Is that right?
So this was for a CAISO resource, and the opportunity cost was effective for the month of August, meaning it was calculated the month before August in July.
So, sorry. So, but it's based on an opportunity cost. I mean, you're using it in August. Is that right? And so the
Correct.
opportunity
The
cost must
opportunity
be
cost
for
was effective for August.
for September, right? Or you're saying that they're assuming that there's a price above 1,000 later in August, so they can use the opportunity cost in August. But when August ends and that doesn't arise, they can't use it in September?
Michelle, let me clarify. We have a process that estimates the opportunity cost for every single resource that is used limited and is registered with a specific limitation. The cycle of that calculation is naturally a month. So every month we have to estimate the opportunity cost. It happens that for the month of August, yes, there was that opportunity cost that triggered. That is basically reset for September, and based on the conditions and the limitations used for September, we come with a new opportunity cost. And for September, it happens that there was no such value there.
Okay, and we're using bilateral indices, is that right?
No, for the opportunity cost is a it's a completely different construct. The opportunity cost is basically an estimate of the potential revenues that a use limited resource could have if we were able to relax the limitation that it has. We're trying to discover what is the value of having that use limitation for that resource. And that is predicated heavily on the nature of the limitation. It could be a number of startups, it could be an energy limitation for a hydro. So it's basically an ad hoc calculation for the type of resource and limitation that we're dealing with.
Okay, this is not that standard one where it's tied to SP or NP15 for the remainder of the month. So, okay,
Oh, yeah.
thanks for the clarification.
So I got it. Yeah, opportunity cost may have many different implications. This opportunity cost is specific to the use limitation nature of resources. Yes.
Got it. Thank
Completely
you.
different to the other things. Yes.
Okay.
I don't see any more questions. Thank you for the question. Okay, let's move to the next slide, and let's take a look at the second modification, storage bid cap for the real-time market. And the storage bid cap remained at 1,000 since the bid cap rules have been implemented from August 1st until September 8th. Reasons being none of the components triggered the bid cap to be raised. There were no DEBs for storage resources, and again, these are non-storage DEBs. There were none of those above 1,000. There was no cost verified bid that exceeded 1,000, either due to no reference level change request submitted or no bids submitted above 1,000 when the DEB was above 1,000, as we just saw there was one. The third component is the fourth highest real-time max import bid price component. That one also did not exceed 1,000. The highest value it reached was $488 in the real-time market on September 5th. September 5th was the highest price day that we have seen. And the chart shows in red, then the real-time, and in blue for the day-ahead market, that was the day where the fourth highest maximum bid price was the highest value, but not above 1,000. Question in the room.
Yeah, hi, Callie Wells with WPTF again. So obviously, I think August and September were a little bit more mild than July, and this didn't go into place until August 1st. Do you guys have a sense, have you looked at whether or not that maybe the bid cap would have been above 1,000 in July?
We haven't looked at that analysis, but we can certainly investigate it. This was mainly to target what the behavior was since the modifications were implemented August 1st.
Okay, thanks.
But thanks for the question. Is that a new question from Michelle? Okay, hand disappeared. Okay. We continue? Okay. This slide shows bids that were submitted for storage resources, and this is before any kind of validation rules were applied in the bidding system. What we see here is that this is the count of resources that were bidding above 1,000 in the day-ahead market, which is in red, and the real-time market in blue. For the real-time market, if there was even 1 hour where a bid was submitted above 1,000, that's counted the same as if the resource bid for all 24 hours. This is just in an instance where a resource bid at any time above 1,000 on that trading day. What we can see here is that there was a bid above 1,000 submitted every single day. And in particular, you can see on September 5th, the high price day, that there were over 15 bids submitted above 1,000. in the real-time market. This slide shows what happened to those bids, and it shows that there's a lot of colors here. What's important to note is that there was no colors corresponding to bids above 1,000. Many bids, particularly in the bright green color that's shown at the very top of the chart, from 900 to 1,000, reflects that the storage bids were capped at $1,000. Now, this is just for the day-ahead market, and the storage bid cap rules apply to the real-time market. So when we go to the real-time market slide, we will see something very similar. This next slide shows the same bids that were applied in the market, but on an hourly basis, an hourly average in the day-ahead market. This is the slide that now shows storage bids in the real-time market. Again, we can see that all the bids were capped at $1,000. There were no bids above $1,000 as expected, given that the storage bid cap remained at 1,000. The next slide shows an hourly average of the same data, again, showing that bids were capped at $1,000. Looks like there's a question online from Kyle. Can Kyle be unmuted, please?
Hey, Kyle Navas with Public Advocate's Office. Back on slide 37, can you just confirm that this only applies to storage resources?
Yes, Kyle, this is only storage resources. This does not differentiate the type of DEB that they have. This is every storage resource.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thanks for the question. Seeing no more, let's continue. And I would like to talk about a bid validation issue that we observed after the implementation of the enhancement. There were two flavors of this, so I'll talk about both of the flavors. In the first flavor of the issue, the conditions were that a storage resource with two bid segments, one for charging and one for discharging, and the discharging bid submitted above $1,000. The outcome was that the charging portion of the bid was revised inappropriately. The table illustrates this in a similar way. We see that there's a charging portion from -75 to 0 megawatts, where the bid was submitted at -150, and the discharging portion from 0 to 75 megawatts was submitted at $2,000. The $2,000 bid was revised to $1,000 appropriately because the bid cap had not been raised. However, the charging bid was also revised to 0 when it should have been accepted as is at -150. This issue was identified and corrected before go live on July 31st. However, there were already bids submitted for the day-ahead market for August 1st, and therefore the impact extended specifically to the day-ahead market on August 1st. There were two resources that bid in this way, and those were the two that were affected. The second flavor of this issue involved a very similar kind of behavior. Again, a storage resource, but this time more than two segments. So in this example, 3 segments, where again the discharging bid was submitted above 1,000. This is the trigger that the discharging bids are submitted above 1,000. The other lower segments bids were either at or above the DEB value or below the DEB value. And the outcome here was that the lower bid segments, where the bid was submitted above the DEB, were revised inappropriately to the DEB. Let's look at this table, which illustrates the example a little bit clearer. You have 3 segments. The first charging segment from -10 to 0, and then 2 discharging segments, 0 to 5 megawatts and 5 to 10 megawatts. The 5 to 10 megawatt bid was above 1,000 at 1050, the lower segments had a bid above the DEB at 65, where the DEB was 0.2. And then the lowest segment, the charging segment, had a bid of -15, which was lower than the DEB value. The inappropriate revision was for the segment where the bid was above the DEB, which is that second one from 0 to 5. That $65 bid should have been allowed as is, but was instead revised to the DEB of 0.2. Meanwhile, the bid below it of -15 was allowed as is, which is appropriate because the bid was below the DEB value. This issue was identified and corrected in production on August 8th, and there were only 2 resources who bid in this way for 2 days of August, and only in the real-time market. Okay, that's what I have for the first piece, which is the bidding rules for the storage resources and raising the DEB above 1,000. I'd like to move on to the next piece, which is the shaping factor and the maximum import bid price enhancement that is proposed. Again, the purpose of this is to present the analysis on the performance of the current shaping factor and the proposed shaping factor and compare them, especially for this most recent heat wave in the beginning of September. But first, let's start with a little bit of background, just to recap what the drivers are for this particular modification or this enhancement. The FERC 831 is where it starts. We saw previously that FERC 831 required cost verification of energy bids above 1,000 up to 2,000, but it also includes cost verification of imports, exports, virtual bids, and other non-resource specific resources. For those types of resources, the CAISO uses the max import bid price to screen any bids above 1,000. The reason why the max import bid price is used is because it is intended to represent the prevailing energy prices outside of the CAISO area. Those prevailing energy prices are represented by 2 main bilateral power hubs, Mid-C and Palo Verde. However, those bilateral power prices are published in multi-hour blocks, while the CAISO prices are hourly. So via the hourly energy price shaping factor component of the max import bid price, the bilateral prices can be translated into an hourly curve, as CAISO prices vary hourly. So a little bit of recap on the previous events that have happened on the hourly energy shaping factor calculation. The workshop on May 28th on the maximum import bid price analysis included a presentation from the CAISO that covered analysis and discussed potential improvements to the shaping factor. In that presentation, the implications of the current formulation were explored, and a comparison to the literal shaping factor was performed, especially for high-priced historical days, where literal is essentially shorthand for the formula that's used from a literal reading of the tariff language, which I'll present in the next slide as a reminder. As part of that workshop, stakeholders provided feedback regarding the formulation and the application of that shaping factor, and consequently, a proposed enhancement to the current shaping factor is to change the calculation such that the shaping factor has the days aligned within that calculation. Work has been initiated on this enhancement, and it's expected to be implemented in mid-November. Specifically, the proposed enhancement to the hourly energy shaping factor, which uses the literal formulation, is displayed here. The key difference to note is in the numerator of the calculation. You can see that in the current formulation, the numerator is the hourly day-ahead SMEC for the current high-price day, and in the literal reading, the numerator is the hourly day-ahead SMEC for a high-price day. And you can see in the literal formulation, that the numerator and denominator are aligned to use the same day, while the current formulation is not aligned. The max import bid price calculation does not change. It's just the shaping factor that's used in the maximum import bid price calculation that will change. Okay. An additional component that we have considered in the proposed enhancement is to consider some nuanced conditions that occur during the year. There are a number of strange or nuanced situations that are described here. For instance, the day when daylight savings occurs both on the short day and on the long day, where there's a difference between the hours of the high price day and the trading day. Another flavor of that is when daylight savings, when the change occurs such that there's a difference in the time zone conversion for the days before daylight savings and the day after daylight savings when they fall within the same season. And then lastly, days which are all off peak compared to the high price day or the trading day, which are not all off peak. While these occurrences happen only for a small period during the year, it's important to account for these clearly and intentionally, especially as the max import bid price is being used for broader purposes than we have before, specifically referring to the storage bid cap rules. The way that we are addressing these nuanced conditions is to make sure that the high price day and the trading day are aligned with the start and end times of each hour. Okay, to summarize the findings from the shaping factor analysis and the maximum import bid price analysis from the period of August 1st to September 8th, what we've seen is that the energy bid ceiling remained at 1,000 from all days except for one, which was on September 5th, which was the highest price day of this period, where the maximum import bid price exceeded $1,000, which triggered an increase in the energy bid ceiling. Remember that the energy bid ceiling is different than the storage bid cap. The current and literal shaping factors were the same on the high price days, which was from September 5th to September 7th. The literal shaping factor was higher in the days leading up to that high price period. This plot shows the maximum import bid price and the energy bid ceiling on the high price day of September 5th. We can see that in the day-ahead market and in the real-time market, the maximum import bid price, which is in red, exceeded $1,000, and consequently the energy bid ceiling was also raised to $2,000. In the day-ahead market, that occurred for 1 hour, hour ending 20, and in the real-time market, that occurred for hour ending 19 and hour ending 20. The driver for the max import bid price to increase above 1,000, if you recall the formula that I shared a few slides ago, the max import bid price is driven by the bilateral power prices as well as the shaping factor. And on that day of September 5th, both the next day on-peak bilateral power prices spiked and the shaping factor also spiked. This plot shows the bilateral power prices for on-peak for both Mid-C and Palo Verde throughout this period. And you can see at the end of the chart here on the right that on September 5th, there was a big spike, especially for Mid-C, which is the one that drove the maximum import bid price above 1,000. This chart compares the literal and current maximum import bid price, what the literal maximum import bid price would have been on these days. What we can see is that the red line, which is the literal, and the blue line is the current. The red line in the days leading up to September 5th was higher than the current maximum import bid price. This is expected because The literal maximum import bid price uses the high price day in both the numerator and the denominator, while the current maximum import bid price uses the most recent price for the numerator. Naturally, the high price day is going to have a higher price than the most recent day leading up to the high price days. But once you're in the high price days, which is from September 5th to 7th, the current day's prices and the high price day become the same. And that's what we see. This is where the lines are completely overlapping. The values of the maximum import bid price were exactly the same. Looks like there's a question from Michelle.
Yeah, this is Michelle from the CPUC Energy Division. This is just a process question. Are you guys going to change the BPM, and have you already initiated that? Because the BPM does have this alternative methodology in it.
Yes, Michelle, the BPM changes are in process and will be published
Great, thank
well
you.
ahead of the enhancement going into being effective in mid-November.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you for the question. Continue. The next slide is essentially showing something very similar, but this time it's comparing the actual shaping factor values to show how the maximum import bid price is behaving, because that's the only thing that's changing between the comparison is the shaping factor. Again, what we see here is that the literal shaping factor and the current shaping factor are the same for the high price days, September 5th, 6th, and 7th, but that the literal shaping factor is higher than the current shaping factor for the days leading up to the high price day, which is based on the logic I described earlier, where the numerators are different in the two calculations. So this is essentially all I have for the analysis of the bid capping rules, as well as the proposed modifications to the shaping factor. Let me see if there's any more questions online or in the room. Yep. Michelle, please go ahead.
In the stakeholder process, we discussed the differences. You guys discussed potential other changes based on regional differences. Are you guys going to continue that discussion? Because we do have price separation, pretty substantial price separation between California, the north, and the south during high price days. And so in some ways, we're having the northern prices affect our prices, even though our market is more is vastly more thickly traded than the bilateral indices. And so it's sort of like, if you have just 5 transactions in the south and then that affects our market, it does seem like we should take into account these regional differences. So are you guys going to continue that discussion?
Hi, Michelle, this is Guillermo. Yes, you are right. When we have the workshop on May 28th, in addition to the targeted item of the shaping factors, we were also discussing other peripheral items like the regional nature of the logic. And process-wise, what we're trying to do here is to address what we believe is within the spirit of the original implementation that requires only a BPM change, a business practice manual change. But there are other items that we need to find a house where we can continue that discussion. So this is not all. This is just very surgically addressing this shaping factor enhancement, but there will be more discussion for the other items that may not be just within the scope of a BPM change, but maybe more on the policy side.
Okay, and where do you imagine that discussion might take place?
We're trying to find a house for that. So as soon as we have something, we can share and move forward with that item.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Don't see any more questions online or in the room. Thank you for your time.
Okay, let's change gears now and go into some area that is more on the operational side. I think we have covered a lot of the summer performance, these enhancements for the policy, and I would like to focus a little bit now on ongoing items that impact the operation of the system. And one of them is a long-standing discussion we have had about the load conformance. There is some material that is being reused here for reference. Let me see. Got frozen. Okay, thank you. Yeah, there is some reference material here just for context so that we have this information available to you and understand where we are coming from. I don't expect to go through all of these details, but just have that for your own understanding. We have the load conformance, and this is a practice by our operators in which, by the time we are running the market, the operators have the ability to adjust the load forecast. Either in the upward or downward direction, they can put these adjustments to ask for more supply or for less supply. That load conformance applies to either the day-ahead market specific to the reliability unit commitment, the ROC process, or any of the real-time sub-markets, the hourly process, the 15 and the 5-minute process. And the objectives, the goals for using those load conformances really vary from market to market. In the day-ahead market, the objective is to ensure that we can secure supply committed to be able to meet effectively the net load uncertainty, because there are changes of load, wind, and solar going from the day-ahead to the real-time. We want to ensure that the ROC process is able to see what additional commitments need to have to account for that uncertainty. When we move to the hour ahead in the real-time market, the objective is really to position resources to ensure that we are able to ramp through the conditions of the day. Typically, the challenges are the evening, afternoon ramps up to the peak. And when we move now into the balancing market, the 5-minute market, the objective is really just to true up imbalances. This is when you're looking at the A's, the error, the deviations, and this load conformances is just to true up that difference between what the market is seeing versus what the actual system is balancing for. Let me start first with the trend of the ROC process, the day-ahead market. This is the trend for the last 8 years. And it's a distribution of all the adjustments that have been applied over these years, and it's broken out by year and also on an hourly profile, just to give you the sense at what time of the day the adjustments have taken place. And naturally, the target time is the evening, ramp, and the peak in the night. When we started tracking this as early as 2014-15, the ROC adjustments were basically judgment from the operators, and they were used very ad hoc, very infrequently. As we started getting the mix of supply changing in our system, the challenges start to be different. And once you have 1,000 megawatts of solar versus almost 20,000 megawatts of solar, you're in a different place, and therefore the needs are different, and the operators' concerns and actions are going to be different. As you can see over the years, that sporadic ad hoc adjustments become more persistent over time. We have provided over the years guidance to the operators to determine how they can better shape that ROC adjustment. Back in 2020, for instance, we started providing them some reference of how much uncertainty they have to deal with load, wind, and solar in what we call the confidence bands. We provide the forecast, but we also tell them, well, in addition to that forecast, you may be facing this level of uncertainty, extra 3,000 megawatts. That would be a guidance for them to know how much they have to secure in the day-ahead process. And then when we start having all these confidence bands add together, you end up in cases where the adjustment was kind of extreme, up to 10,000 megawatts. That is when we committed that we would transition to start using a more scientific calculation that is using basically the same logic we are expected to have for the day-ahead market enhancement, that is the imbalance reserve. We are using that logic as a guidance for the operators to know how much ROC adjustments they need to have. We implemented that last summer, And since then, we have been going through a series of tuning and enhancements under the current construct, that is the rock process. This is a different way to see that over time. And this is just a daily average value of the rock adjustments, just to give you a sense, time-wise, event-wise, how these have evolved. There are many things happening in the system. Naturally, when you have peaking conditions, summer conditions, you expect to see that these values tend to be higher. When you have shoulder months, winter months, naturally they are going to be lower. We have at some point a pilot program to try to see what we were really gaining or not getting by using or not using the rock adjustments, and that is the piece of the blank portion that you have somewhere in May 20. And once we start implementing this imbalance logic, you can see how it consistently went up and stayed quite high even after the summer. That required a lot of tuning to ensure that it was calibrated to capture the non-summer conditions. And as of now, we have done at least 3 rounds of enhancements, and that effectively is influencing how much rock adjustments are being used in the day-ahead market. You can see that when we implemented the last enhancement back in early May, May 7, I believe, effectively there were very minor adjustments. In some days, there was no adjustment at all. As we progress now into the summer, we start to see a higher use of the rock adjustments because the level of uncertainty that we want to cover is higher. So it's expected that it's going to naturally increase over time for the summer conditions. If you look at the profile for the last 2 years, just to have a comparison how that has evolved over the 2 years in an hourly profile, you can see that the profile is quite consistent. We have these rock adjustments that go from the morning peak to the evening peak, in some cases even in the middle of the day. And prior to that, we have these rock adjustments targeting basically only the evening and the peak conditions. The ones in blue, the trends in blue stand for the previous year. The ones in red stand for the current year. And if we are placing ourselves now in Q3 2024, you can see that we started in basically May with very small adjustments, only in the morning peak and in the evening peak. And then as we progress towards the summer, these values also started to increase, but also there were values in the middle of the day, because for the summer months, basically you sustain a ramp going from the morning peak all the way up to the evening peak. There is no belly of the duck in the middle of the day like in the shoulder months. And this is where we are right now. I think once we complete the summer, we're going to be updating the operating procedure where we lay out specifically the criteria that we have, how we move from the specific levels of uncertainty given the conditions, not only in the CAISO area, but also in the West. One of the factors that was quite a glaring conclusion of how these rock adjustments was impacting the market has to do with the cost. We track this cost regarding the Bitcoin recovery, that is the uplift that has to be socialized in order to make resources whole. And when we have these rock adjustments implemented in the summer 2023, we could see that the portion in red that belongs to the rock process, that BCR component increased quite significantly. And it stayed high even after the summer conditions, just because these requirements were still pretty high, and that was driving a lot of unit commitments that happened to be uneconomical. And therefore, there was need for BCR to compensate these uneconomical dispatches. As you can see, as we move out of the Q4 and we start implementing these enhancements and changes to the levels of uncertainty, basically the level of BCR for the rock process collapsed, and it's pretty small, relatively smaller even than the previous year. And this is where we are right now with the rock process. Similar condition happens for the real time, even though the dynamics are quite more challenging once we are dealing with the real-time conditions. Part of the effort that we have taken is that we really need to understand all the variables, all the factors at play that induce the need for operators to use the load conformance in the real time. We have taken that long path of understanding, unpacking all these driving forces, and we have come with these 10 different reasons why there is a need for operators to use the load conformance in the real time. And we have to go one by one, tackling one by one to find how we can mitigate for that condition. I can tell you, for instance, one of the two most recent areas that we have been analyzing is the utilization of regulation. When there is an asymmetrical use of regulation, the operators are going to use load conformance to move the base point and regain a space of regulation headroom. And that is achieved to some extent with using load conformance. And we need to improve in that aspect. The more recent area that we have tackled is the performance of the flexible ramping product. And there is some material in subsequent sections that highlight that point. And I can just tell you in a nutshell what the challenge here is. Many of the metrics you are going to see for FRP performance has to do with what technology is supporting the FRP, what technologies are carrying the procurement of FRP. And you will see pretty clearly that much of that FRP procurement is supported by storage resources, all 24 hours of the day. And that is where we started the investigation, because they are not endless resources with the state of charge for all 24 hours. There are complications to maintain the state of charge. What we have come to the realization is that the way the market is currently procuring for FRP and accounting for that for storage resources is effectively not including the impact of the state of charge. So if you have FRP procured for one interval on a storage resource, and that storage resource now is using that FRP, is converted from capacity to energy, that naturally is going to impact the state of charge. And that energy is no longer available for the subsequent intervals. The procurement of the FRP doesn't see that. It can continue to use that projection that, yes, I have a storage resource capacity, I can continue to use it without taking into account that it's depleting the state of charge. We are working on an enhancement to be able to account for that dynamic, and that naturally should be able to resettle what technology can support the FRP procurement. As of now, much of that FRP capacity is not going to be real capacity that can be utilized in the real time. This is the trend of the hourly load conformance that we have over time. And it's quite dynamic, just because it reflects the dynamics of the real time. The lowest levels that you may have seen in this period reported has to do with the pilot program, where we were very surgical trying to identify the drivers for the load conformance, and we tried to be very conservative in the level of conformance that was used. Then you have emergencies conditions of July. Naturally, that tends to spike the utilization of the load conformance. Now we went into the shoulder months. There is not much conditions to handle that with load conformance. The levels are relatively moderate. And as we go into the summer, you can see that now we are trending up in the magnitude of the load conformance that we have. Let me see if we have any questions. Okay. Oh, you're checking on that. Yeah. Can we unmute Michelle, please?
Yeah, Michelle again. I'm Michelle Keto at CPUC Energy Division. Can you go back to slide 58, please? I think it's the one showing the load conformance over time. Yeah, this one right here. So I have been noticing, so if you look at July 24th, Q3, the purple, so I've been noticing that your REC adjustments are largest in hour ending 19, but not as high, like half as high in hour ending 20. But it seems to me that hour ending 20 is always our more difficult hour. If you look at all of the prices are always highest in hour ending 20. And this concerns me for a number of reasons, one of which is we use REC adjustments to keep RA resources home to account for uncertainty. And if you let them flow in hour ending 20, those real-time, those day-ahead exports go into, first of all, go into CAISO's RSE calculation, right? So So those are potentially RA resources that we're exporting, day-ahead exports, and then go into our calculation of the resource efficiency test. And I guess what I'm saying is, although the uncertainty associated with wind and solar might be larger in hour ending 19, the uncertainty of the system is much larger in hour ending 20. And I just think that we're not taking that into account here. Or we haven't been taking that into account this entire summer.
Yeah, that's a very interesting topic, Michelle, and I can see the logic there. Now let me tell you where we are coming from. The purpose of using the ROC adjustment in the day-ahead market is to ensure that we have capacity committed to handle the uncertainty. And that uncertainty is associated with the movement of load, wind, and solar. Now,
Yes.
let me finish the idea here. And I see your point, but I think, let me first clarify one of the statements that you made. We are not putting ROC adjustments to keep certain supply in our system in certain way. We are doing it to ensure that we have capacity committed to handle the uncertainty that can be realized. Okay, it's quite different.
Okay, well, I guess I would argue that the uncertainty is largest in hour ending 13 because of solar and wind, but we use 0 because we know it doesn't matter.
Yeah, well, let me complete the idea. So that is one clarification I wanted to make. Now, the idea of what you're observing for hour ending 19 and 20 is that, well, if there is no wind and solar in hour ending 20, your uncertainty naturally is not going to be there. So the uncertainty is quantified based on the movement that you have. And for that, you need to have load and solar moving around. And yes, hour ending 20 happens to be when you basically have lost all the supply of solar. Therefore, there will be no uncertainty realized for solar because it's gone. The uncertainty is going to happen only when you have production of the solar in place, and that happens to be prior to hour ending 20.
Right, but that's because of the way you defined it. But if you were just leaving it up to operators, like when do I need to make sure that I have sufficient capacity for uncertainty for, like, for example, load uncertainty, which we got wrong all throughout the summer by 2,000 megawatts, load uncertainty still exists. Likewise, forced outage uncertainty still exists as well. So it seems to me that maybe we're focusing on the wrong uncertainty. If we think that the middle of the day has lots of uncertainty and we decide we're going to make it 0, if you look what the operators did last year, I mean, there was uncertainty over the nighttime period and they still made RUC adjustments. So they were making RUC adjustments for something else. So I think maybe we're focusing on the wrong thing. That's just because I am concerned about allowing high priority exports in the day ahead that get included in our resource sufficiency test. And we also potentially export the RA resources that may be home for uncertainty, load uncertainty, generation uncertainty, et cetera. Okay, that was one of my points. My second point is that we know the interaction between these uncertainty calculations and the imbalance reserves. And if the imbalance reserves are to address uncertainty with a 95% confidence, that's going to be very high uncertainty all 24 hours of the day. And that's going to lead to high BCR, right? If you commit gas resources during the day to account for uncertainty that we know we don't really need to account for. And I just want some commitment that we are going to readdress this because we already know from your analysis that it's expensive to do the imbalance reserves and commit those resources when we know we have sufficient resources in the winter or during the middle of the day.
Yeah, and thank you, Michelle, for pointing that. And I can tell you that I could see this as two-part discussion. The first one is that, as I indicated, the original motivation for using the similar logic that we have for imbalance reserve to guide the level of the ROC adjustments is under the current construct of the ROC process, right? The ROC process is basically a capacity market, and there is no economical reduction of how much we have to procure. Basically, you procure it or you're infeasible, and that's it. Now, that is going to be different under the day-ahead market enhancement because now there is an explicit product that is price sensitive and is when it comes all together, right? So I want to make sure that we don't compare side to side because they are slightly different constructs under different conditions. Now, to your point, I think part of having this experience of going through the ROC process and trying to use the logic of the imbalance reserve is actually a good experience to have because it's revealing things that we have to be ready when we implement the day-ahead market enhancements. I can tell you this will be continue to be more discussions of eventually how we want to set up the conditions for the day-ahead market enhancement, given the construct of the day-ahead market that is imbalance reserves, price sensitive, a market product. So
Right.
to your point,
But
there
it-
will be
even
more
if it's-
discussion on this.
Right, but even if it's price sensitive, even if it doesn't cost us a lot of money, if we have a BCR product, we still might commit them at a very low price, but then have to pay very large BCR. So I don't think that price sensitivity gets us that if you define it as trying to procure 95% uncertainty. And the second thing is, we talk about doing this, but no one talks about the timeline. Are we proposing that we're going to change that 95% uncertainty before we get to the day ahead market? I just don't feel like there's any urgency. And I see quite a bit of urgency in discussing this and trying to come to a resolution about what we're trying to procure because it will have BCR implications, as you guys have determined.
Yeah, to your point, Michelle, I can tell you that we have internal assessments of this. There will be an opportunity to discuss this publicly in the upcoming time. So we are aware of what you are implying here, and we are assessing how we are going to make that transition from the existing ROC process to the day-ahead market enhancement. And I would take, we are taking advantage of learning how this is operating on the recurrent construct, but I would just suggest you that give us some time to be able to come publicly how we're going to approach this. And we still have a good time to be able to reconcile the approach we're going to implement for the day ahead.
Okay, thanks. And I would also welcome further discussion about our ending 19. Thanks.
Kelly? Yes.
Hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. I originally had just one question, but just one other question that just came to mind with that conversation. So you said that you're planning on discussing this. Is that through I think in the day ahead configurable parameters discussion, you guys presented a timeline, and part of that included the imbalance reserve requirement discussion that's supposed to, I think, kick off next month. Is that what you're referring to?
I think that could be an opportunity to have that discussion. Strictly speaking, it's not part of the configurable parameters because there is a specific list that are making up the configurable parameters, right? But there is a preceding item that is about the setup of the imbalance reserve requirement. So I think that could be an opportunity to have.
Okay, and I think it's that timeline that's supposed to kick off next month.
Much sooner than the formal configurable parameters, yes.
Okay, great, thanks. So my original question is actually back, you just briefly mentioned this interaction between FRP and the impact on storage state of charge. And I think I heard you say that you guys are looking at ways to address that. I'm not sure if you're at a point where you can elaborate on that a little bit more, but are you guys looking at changing the SOC formulation, or are you looking more at changing something with FRP design itself?
No, it would be more on the FRP design itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Do you have anything else, Brenda? Okay. And Dan, please go ahead.
Hey, Guillermo, Dan Williams from the Energy Authority. Excellent presentation as always. It's probably just on my mind as I've been watching some of the ISO's YouTube videos, getting caught up on stakeholder meetings I missed. But one of those was the BCR for storage resources, the last meeting that we had. And one of the things we talked about that you all talked about in there in the meeting was the load forecast as part of the multi-interval optimization and how that can impact kind of how resources are getting used in the market. And I was just wondering if your team has had some discussion with the team working on that around how load conformance maybe impacts the scheduling of storage resources and thereby impacts the BCR trends that we're seeing, and if there's potentially any correlation between reductions in load conformance within the operating day and the way that BCR is accruing for storage resources.
Well, I can just tell you that we are part of the internal group working on on the effort, and yes, we are doing some type of analysis to support the policy development. I think eventually whatever we are able to put forward will be consolidated in the proposal.
Okay, great. That's good to hear, and thanks for getting this data out there for us to look at.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, let's move on to the next item. Okay, let me change gears now, and this is just an update to one of the topics that we discussed in the last NPPF, and has to do with the production of renewable resources and reduction of the production of these resources. Let me start with some context, because it's important to put this in the right frame. We have, over the years, large penetration of renewable resources, and by renewable, I really mean solar and wind. And years back, when we start tracking how much reductions of that production was accrued in the market, we call this curtailment, right? You have a condition in which a renewable resource is able to produce up to a certain point. Just on the sun, on the wind, there is this natural production level. And then, due to the operation of the system, through the market, we determine that we have to dispatch that resource to something lower than what it can naturally produce. That delta, that reduction, is what we historically called curtailment. Now, the context of using that term has to do with the fact that when we start tracking this, effectively, all the renewable resources were not economically participating in the market. They basically have a self-schedule, and they were saying, I want to produce as much as possible. I'm going to put a self-schedule, no price. I'm willing to be exposed to any price. And therefore, the market has to reduce, to curtail those self-schedules. Over the years, that has changed. I would say that the majority of the renewable resources are economically participating in the market. They have a price quantity expressing their willingness to be moved up, down based on that price. So the term curtailment may be no longer quite relevant in that context. It's no more than an economic dispatch that we are applying to these renewable resources, like what we do to any other type of resource participating in the energy market based on the bids. In the recent years, this economic participation has increased significantly. And that is the reason that you can see that we have this classification that puts the context whether that reduction of production is based on congestion, economics, or self-schedule reductions. And when you see the actual curtailments of the self-schedules, is basically noise. In some months, there is even no curtailments at all. This is one of the trends that we have been tracking, and that is, first, the level of reductions that we have over the years. And we have classified those in different groups. One dimension to the grouping is whether they are due to oversupply or because of congestion. And these are quite different operational conditions that we are dealing with that can result in one or the other. The other dimension to the classification is whether they were based on economic participation, based on price, whether they were exceptional dispatch, basically instructed by the operators to follow certain dispatch, or by reducing the self-schedule. When you look at these 6 groups, the combination of these 2 dimensions, you are going to find that there are mainly 2 groups that are driving the majority of this reduction, and that is economic congestion, followed by economic oversupply. The term congestion here really refers to instances where renewable resources are dispatched down because they are effective to relieve congestion. The congestion is quite widespread. It can be basically any transmission constraint, anywhere in the system for which that renewable resource has an impact that can exacerbate congestion, and therefore it has to be decrementally dispatched. That transmission constraint can be a very localized, a small element in a corner of the system, or it could be a major backbone element of the system, like path 15, path 26. So when you have one of these major transmission constraints congested, for instance, let's say path 15, effectively the market is going to move down half of the generation mix that is located on one side of the constraint, and is going to ink the other half of the resources that are located on the other side of the constraint. And when we classify this as congestion, we really don't make any distinction whether this is because a very surgical local constraint or a wider regional constraint. It's just congestion. There are more nuances on this, because as long as we see that there was an effect of congestion, that curtailment, that reduction is specifically classified as congestion. However, there may be cases in which the congestion may be concurrent with oversupply. That means you already have a low or negative energy price on top of congestion. So the idea here is that it's not a very clean separation of just congestion versus oversupply. There may be many cases where it's actually both. And we are going to see where we can do better job to try to do a cleaner separation of congestion versus oversupply. And this is just important in the context of understanding what we mean by congestion. The other way you can see that metric of reductions is what type of resources are being impacted. Yeah, it is renewable resources. When you classify that between wind and solar, the majority of those reductions are from solar. And that makes sense, happens in the middle of the day, and solar is a factor of 3, 4 relative to the size of wind. Now, where in the system the reductions are taking place? This is a new graph that we have, and it's capturing the total volume of reductions of renewable resources per year. Every dot that you have here represents one individual resource, and the size of that bubble stands for the volume of the reduction. The larger the bubble, the more reduction of that resource experienced in that year. The color is basically following the same logic of the bubble size. The lighter the blue, the more reduction you have for that specific resource. And we just place it where they are geographically located, just to give you a graphical sense of where the reductions are happening in the year. And you can see it's all over the place. It basically is in the whole footprint where you have all the resources, all of them experience to some extent a level of reduction. There are some areas over the years you can see how they are increasing. There are larger and larger bubbles, specifically, for instance, in Central California, right? You can see that there are larger bubbles there, but also in the far southeast, where we have all this area of the Imperial Valley. These are where the reductions are happening for renewable resources. A slightly different topic. This is the penetration of solar resources. It is the time of the year during the shoulder months and all the way up to July sometimes where we see these new records. We have higher and higher penetration of solar, and we're very close to reach the 20,000 megawatts of solar production. And this just tells you how those records have been progressing over the years. We start somewhere tracking this back to 2018. The slope of changes from record to record were kind of flat, horizontal, meaning there were very marginal increases as we approach every record. But look at 2024. It's a very steep slope that we have for these records of solar, basically one above the other, basically meaning that in a very narrow time period, there are higher and higher levels of production. And again, we are very close to the 20,000 megawatts now of solar production. There is another metric that is the percentage of load served with renewable resources. And this just captures the days where we exceed the 100%. It doesn't tell you for how long it was sustained. It just tells you that at some point it just reached or exceed the 100%. And there were up to 44 days so far in 2024 where we met load 100% with renewable resources. And that typically happens prior to the summer, just in the shoulder months when we have relatively lower levels of demand, high penetration of renewable resources. As we got into the summer, the demands are quite higher, and therefore the records are going to be much lower. When you look at the time of the year when these records happen, it is not happening yet in the peak time, in the evening ramp. It is happening in the midday hours when we have plenty of solar production and the lowest level of demand in the day. And you see the range of the time that is the y-axis, they happen anywhere between a.m. to most likely 3, 4 p.m. Again, these are the middle of the day when we have the highest penetration of solar production. And this is just a trend over time of all the energy that is provided by clean energy, in this case, hydro, solar, and wind. And it's an increasing trend. We have some variations here for hydro, for instance. If you look at 2021, we have a drought, right? The production of hydro was relatively low and is reflected in those bars in dark blue. But as you have better hydro years and you have higher penetration of solar, you can see how we are increasing the level of energy provided by these clean energies. This is the trend for storage resources, only under the condition of supply, basically when they are discharged and they are providing capacity to meet the load obligation in the CAISO system. And the time frame is quite short because all started to be material since 2020, and you can see the steep ramp that it has gone through the last 2-3 years. This is how fast, how dramatic the penetration of the storage resources has been in our system, to the extent that it has increased the supply dramatically in this year alone. This gives you a different perspective of the storage resources, getting you both the supply and demand side, basically the charging middle of the day, where you have the low prices, plenty of solar production, and it's the ideal time for the storage resources to charge. It also helps, that is the time where you may be dealing with oversupply, and they come here to close that gap. They take all that excess of supply and arbitrage that towards the end of the day, to the peak time. So it's a very nice way to see how storage resources are effectively arbitraging, displacing the excess of supply in the middle of the day to meet the needs of the demand in the peak time frame. And you can see how quickly that progression has been over the last 4 years, right? 2020 is just basically a flat line. And now 24 so far is a very steep change of profile that resembles somehow the duck curve, right? Taking all that excess energy in the middle of the day, discharging that in the peak time frame. And in that regard, let me try to elaborate on this other trend. There is one trend in blue, dark blue, is a line. That line is effectively the CAISO demand, the net demand, the standard load minus wind minus solar. That is just the blue line that takes the typical duck curve. There is another line that is in yellow, and that in some cases overlaps with the blue. In other cases is above the blue, like in the middle of the day. If you look at 2024, that yellow line is above the blue line, because that is effectively the new demand that we have to meet, because now storage resources are charging. That imposes additional demand to the system. So effectively, storage resources are moving up the demand in the middle of the day. And it's great because that helps to manage the oversupply. Now, if you look at the evening peak time frame, that yellow line is below the standard demand, because effectively, by discharging storage resources, we are flattening the peak time, the peak demand. That the yellow line is no more than the demand that has to be met by the rest of conventional resources. So in that sense, the storage resources are somehow flattening the duck curve, increasing the value because now you have extra demand to meet, but flattening the peak because now that can be met with the storage resources. And you can see how dramatically that has taken shape over the last 2 years. The first in 2020 is basically negligible. As we progress to 2024, that becomes significantly more material. And just compare the blue line versus the yellow line, and you can see how it has a stretch, flattened that load profile. Just to conclude this section, there is a lot of interest about different metrics, different records, different statistics about the CAISO system, how much renewable, how much records of load served we have, and so on. The word of caution here is that you can end up with many different statistics, with many different records, depending on the convention that you are using. For instance, when we are talking about clean energies, do we really mean renewable resources? That could be wind, solar, biomass, geothermal. Or are we talking about just wind and solar? And then if we want to expand that and talk about clean energies, non-emitting energies, well, now you have to put into the mix nuclear, large hydro. So depending what you use, you may end up with a statistic that is quite different if you use a different context. And it's just a word of caution because there are a lot of interesting metrics out there that may use one convention versus the other, and you end up with this soup of different records that mean different things. And the same thing goes for demand, right? When we talk about CAISO demand, what demand are we really talking about? The demand is composed effectively of 3 components. The portion that we forecast, the conforming load, that is the end user, the industry, the commercial. But we also have now the demand that is imposed by charging the storage resources. That is still an obligation that the CAISO has to balance. That becomes effectively part of the demand that is in the balancing of our system. So whether you use only the forecasting component versus the pump and the storage can lend you into very different records statistics depending what you are using. Okay, do we have any questions, Brenda? No? Okay, let me move quickly to the next topic. Just as a reference, last year we implemented a practice to handle the rapid conditions that were observed in the real time. And that practice was to impose limitations on the transfers that could come into the CAISO in the hourly and 15-minute markets. Effectively, we wanted to rely only on the CAISO resources to meet our own obligation in the projection of the hourly ahead and the 15-minute market, because there were changes happening from those time frames into the balancing of the system, and now in the last minute we realized that we didn't have that much supply. We sustained that process basically from mid-July, July 26 actually, all the way to November 15, because we have 3 major issues that we have to handle. Once we implemented the changes and enhancements for these major issues, we stopped the practice. There was a lot of concern about the sustained utilization of these transfer limitations, and we understand the implications, right? There was price separation, higher prices in the CAISO, lower prices in the rest of the West, and that may have created some concerns of how we were applying these limitations. The good news is that as of now, throughout the summer that we have accrued so far, we have not utilized these transfer limitations. We have the fixes that we implemented last summer all the way through November, and they have been very good in managing the uncertainty that was created. And we have not found the need to apply these limitations so far. If we were in the condition that we still require to apply those limitations, we have committed, we have improved our process to ensure that there is more timely communication. That was one of the areas that we could improve, that there was not much timely communication when and how we were doing those limitations. If that happens again, now we have the protocol to ensure that the market is aware that we are applying those limitations more quickly. And this is a tool, like any other entity participating in the market has available to use. There has just not been the conditions for the need of that tool in this summer so far. Let me change topics, and this is also very quick. As part of the transparency and given the interest that we have for storage resource performance in the CAISO market, back in July 2022, as a bridging, we start posting a report about the performance of the storage resources. That is a report that is publicly available. It's a daily report that contains some basic metrics of storage resources at the system level, dispatch level, storage level, and bidding of those resources day-to-day at the system level. We have gotten so much interest of that report, and we get a lot of requests to make the data available. The information now is available only through the report. You can hover over and see the values, but you cannot get access to the raw data behind the metrics. The point here is that we hear the interest, and we appreciate the interest that people may have on getting access to that information. That information in its current shape is not available on OASIS, and we don't have a project right now to make it available on OASIS. Between now and any IT changes that we could implement in the future, what we are committing is that we're going to start releasing that information, the raw data that is behind those reports, starting in October. And then we will figure out at what frequency, what cadence we can update that information. But that is going to be posted on the website. We are going to issue a market notice, just providing the details where people can get access to that information. And hopefully that can help to bridge the request we get to get access to that information. Okay, let me move to the next topic, that is the flexible ramping product. And I will glance through some of these metrics, and I will pass it to Rebecca halfway. And this is just to give you a sense of where FRP is at. And you may recall we have a major change implemented back in February 2023 when we moved from the system to a nodal approach. As of now, we are enforcing transmission constraints to some extent for procuring FRP. FRP is locational, is nodal, there are nodal prices, and we have been trying to assess how the efficiency of this new framework is working. One of the challenges that we have run into is the implementation of enforcing all the transmission constraints that effectively bind in the energy market to be applicable also for FRP. This is the typical trend of their time of the requirements that we have for the CAISO area. You can see that typically we have requirements in the range of 1,000 megawatts. That is a standard level of FRP for the CAISO area. We have the downward that is much lower in the range of, I would say, 700, 500 megawatts. There are some outliers depending on the time of the year. We have the recent change that Rebecca is going to explain later, happening on August 14, and you can see a little bit of trend change once we have adjusted the requirements with the enhancement. And the hourly profile, where are we procuring FRP? Well, it somehow follows the trend of the demand in the system. You can see that we have procurement increasing in the morning peak, in the evening peak, that reduces in the middle of the day and subsides towards the end of the day and in the very early hours of the day. That is a steady profile that we have seen since day one of the implementation. Okay, I reached this sooner than expected. Do you want to? Alicia, okay. Okay, I think it's going to be remote then, right? Okay. Hey, Alicia.
Alicia, you're on double mute.
Sorry about that. I'm going to take over the last couple slides from this section. So Alicia Watson-Ebley with short-term forecasting.
Do you like going forward or
Mhm.
backwards?
Let's go back one slide. And the next slide after this. And it's the timeline slide. I think it's one more
Oh, got it.
forward. There we go. Yep. So, yeah, jumping in here, wanted to highlight performance since the last enhancement that was effective August 14th. We've now implemented 2 Mosaic enhancements for 2024, which were the 2 planned enhancements. The first one was the removal of the day type definition, and the second is the symmetric sampling scheme, which was implemented 8/14. We're going to focus on performance since that 8/14 enhancement. And just symmetric sampling scheme, the definition there is instead of doing 180 days in the rear as a sample, it's shifted now to more symmetric sampling where we go 90 days in the rear plus 1 year back and then 90 days forward. This enhancement should help performance, especially in the shoulder seasons when we're transitioning. And now we can go to the next slide. So just a view on requirements, looking at the left plot, we're comparing 3 different periods. The first one is August 2023, approximately most of August 2023, then about 30 days pre-change, so pre that 8/14 enhancement, and then about 30 days, 29 days post-change. Comparing the daily average requirements for the EIM area and FRU and FRD, flex ramp up and flex ramp down. We can see that from the distributions, average requirements mostly came down in the post-enhancement change, post-enhancement performance. And then on the plot at the right, we're looking at requirements broken out by BAA, and for the most part in all the BAA's requirements did lower, approximately stayed very similar, but see some generally lower daily requirements. And we can go to the next slide. In terms of coverage, the results are a little bit more mixed by BAA. The sample periods we're comparing is pre-change and post-change. We only have, I think, so the post-change is about 29 days. Simulations for this enhancement were done over a year period, which did show that we can expect coverage to increase. But from the data we have available, it's very limited. So maybe some of those results aren't immediately clear. We're also, capturing different weather patterns and other factors in these sample periods, but we generally expect coverage to increase overall. Results here from this period that we're looking at show varying levels of coverage and change between pre and post enhancement. Yes. Okay, and then I don't think I'm going to go through these slides individually, but the next couple of slides show what we generally report on for FRP, which is the coverage and requirement for CAISO and the EIM area by average by month. So you can refer to those metrics later. Those are all of my slides.
Okay, let's see if we have any questions. Okay, I don't have any questions. Let me just complete the topic then. Okay, just to complement the picture for FRP. As part of the design that we implemented back in 2023, even though each area has its own requirement, when it comes to how we're going to procure that as part of the energy market, we don't do it area by area. Effectively, we gather all the areas that are able to pass the test, and then at that level, we procure across the different balancing areas. It is interesting, however, to see how the market is allocating where the procurement is assigned within the EIM footprint. And there are different ways to see that. One of those is regional-wise. When we have all this requirement that is about 1,500 megawatts, where that flexibility is sitting in the EIM market. These are the standard definitions of the regions. The California, that is not just the CAISO area, but any other area that is within the footprint of the California state, the Central Mountain, the Pacific Northwest, and the Southwest. And there are two dominant colors here. One is the dark blue, that is California, and the other one that is the Pacific Northwest. Between California and the Pacific Northwest, we are procuring all the FRP that is required for the system. And that is not that surprising, given the nature of resources that are in these regions. When you look at in the hourly profile, that starts to become even more interesting. The two areas continue to be the same way. It's California and the Pacific Northwest. The time of the day is also kind of well distributed. There are basically requirements procure all 24 hours, mainly from these two areas. It tends to be higher levels of requirement for the peak time from California. Effectively, the evening ramp, the peak time, is supported mainly by the California areas to procure that FRP. A different way to see this composition is not by the region, but by the type of technology, the type of supply that is supporting the procurement of FRP. We have some standard definitions here of gas resources, the GNRC's non-typical generator that are aggregated hydro resources in the EIM market, like those in the Pacific Northwest. These are aggregated hydro, basically. We have the hybrid, that is storage plus other type of fuel. We have LESR, that is no more than storage resources. And we have solar and hydro. As you can see, there was a very dramatic change somewhere back in September 2023. Prior to that time frame, the majority of the FRP procured was basically from hydro, the GNRC type of generation. That is the aggregated hydro from the Pacific Northwest. And as we start getting more and more storage resource in the system, I mean batteries, they start to take the share of the lion for procurement of FRP. And you can see that light blue belongs to storage resources. So since September, basically since a year ago, storage resources have been the primary technology supporting FRP in capacity for the EIM market. When you look at this across the hours of the day, you can see that it's consistent. It's all 24 hours storage resources supporting FRP. And this goes back to the earlier discussion I was providing, that one of the areas that we identified that need to be enhanced is that the procurement of the FRP needs to account for the impact of the state of charge when storage resources are scaled to procure FRP. Because once an FRP is procured, awarded, and now is actually utilized, that is going to consume a state of charge, and that may put the condition for the next interval to not be able to deplete that energy because it's no longer there. That is the missing link that right now we have in the design of the FRP to account for the impact of the SOC for storage resources. And that is the reason that the market is finding optimal to allocate all this FRP to those resources, because it's just looking at capacity. It's not using whether it can be supported with the state of charge. And that is the enhancement that we have to target. Yes.
Yeah, hi, Guillermo. It's Callie Wells with WPTF. These are super interesting, especially as we're having the conversations with Storage BCR and another effort. But I did want to make sure I understand a couple of the trends I'm seeing. So obviously, we're seeing more procurement from storage resources. And about the same time that seems to start to increase, is when we also see that there's that shift in where it's being procured, more in California, because I think the last NPPF, it seemed like the majority of the FRU was procured in the Pacific Northwest. Was there some market change is there a market change that went in place around that time frame that might be driving this, or can you speak to a little bit more on what's caused, because it seems to be a pretty dramatic change all of a sudden at that month?
Yeah, we cannot correlate a specific market change. My suspicion is more about the hydro conditions in the Pacific Northwest. Because at the end, you need to have the capacity to be able to support that, right? And we saw some changes about the profile of hydro. So I think it's more about that than market changes per se.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, Alba. Alba, do you want to unmute yourself and we can?
Yeah, thanks. I was
hear
unmuted.
you.
Yes, Alva Sabota, PG&E. One thing I was wondering about in terms of how you describe where the FRP is coming from is, so when under EDAM, every balancing area has to provide essentially its own imbalance reserves in order to pass the resource sufficiency test. Do you see this as like sort of that there'll potentially some sort of systematic rebalancing happening in real time and or I mean, does that imply that there might be sort of wastage of imbalance reserves due to it just being more efficient to provide these the flexible ramping product from certain regions? I'm just curious how you see that interaction between imbalance reserves and flexible ramping.
Yeah, honestly, I have to think about that. I haven't put so much thought on that. I can tell you that what we see in the real time is somehow the reflection of the economics, right? Is wherever is more economical and the construct that you are procuring in a bubble that is larger than each individual area. So the reflection of that is really the profile of the procurement that we are seeing. I will have to get back to you later to see what potential implications this may have for the EDAM. I see your point, but I don't have much prepared for that.
Great. And the other thing sort of related to that is how the extent to which the envelope constraints in procuring storage day ahead might affect this question of whether flexible ramping product is being over procured from storage in real time. Another issue to look at maybe.
Oh yes, and that is a new wrinkle that we are going to be tackling with the configurable parameter effort.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. There are pieces about prices. To some extent, prices reflect the economics of what's going on in the system, right? We have focused on the megawatts, where they are located, what technology is supporting those. But when you step back and look at the system-wide, the price is a good reflection of seeing certain dynamics. And one of those dynamics is that we see prices still pretty mild. They are very infrequent, non-zero. And that on its own is sending a signal that, well, the market is considering that it has plenty of supply to be able to meet the requirement, and therefore there is no opportunity cost most of the time. That is the reason you see these very low percentages of non-zero prices. Part of that is predicated on the fact that, well, it is based on opportunity cost, but also on the construct that we have that is in this larger bubble. And there may be also implications of how we are procuring FRP mostly on the storage resources, because if we are saying that now storage resources are able to procure that much FRP, there is plenty of supply. That naturally is going to create a surplus that may be not realistic, because much of that capacity cannot be actually be deployed. And the consequence is going to be these low zero prices. That holds not only for the 50-minute market, but also for the 5-minute market. They are pretty infrequently non-zero. That would be what concludes the portion of the market update before going into the forecast and component. Can we check if we have any questions? Okay, I don't see any other question. Okay, I will pass it to Rebecca. Alicia.
All right, okay. Yeah, jumping back in here. We can go to the next slide. So, quick overview of summer temperatures. In June, we saw most of California and the WEM footprint in above average to much above average temperatures. July definitely warmed up with Oregon, California, Nevada, Arizona seeing very near record warmest temperatures. And then August cooled down a bit relative to historical temps with those temperatures in the footprint at average or above average temps. Desert Southwest still saw some warmer temps at much above average. Next slide, please. We wanted to report here on some of the forecast performance. This is distinct from general like EIM T60 forecast error. This specifically pulls out the top 10 highest load days per BAA so far this year. I think this would go to about September 8th. So if there are still higher load days to come, then that wouldn't be included here. But pulling out those top 10 high load days, how did the forecast perform in those days and what did average error look like then? We see some BAAs definitely have some higher average errors in 2024 compared to previous years. We're calling out a couple here. So APS is really driven by a couple days in summer with MAPES about 3.5%. And then EPA and PacWest really driven up by under forecasting on January 13th, which was the first day of the January cold event. So we're highlighting here different seasonal days can be pulled in here, but generally checking how does the forecast perform in the highest load days per BAA. And we can go to, yep, thank you. So we wanted to touch on real-time solar forecast accuracy at a system level for CAISO. We're seeing real-time solar MAPE showing improvement compared to previous years, but increased positive forecast error. So when what we call a forecasting bias, but basically comparing the error of the forecast to actual is tending to be positive, and we're seeing an increased level of that positive error over time. That is the plot at the top right here, looking at average, essentially bias through July in 4 years. We have been actively reviewing drivers of this increased bias, increased positive forecast error, contributing factors. There are many that we've been uncovering and trying to disentangle, but one of them is really the complexity of properly defining an actual. With that increased level of curtailment, increased supplemental dispatch over time, when we describe an actual, we're generally looking at telemetry plus the value of that supplemental energy. And if the resource doesn't exactly follow that supplemental energy, that can create an erroneous actual, or just the addition there can add complexity or add noise to the calculation. So complexity of defining actual, there's the growth of co-located and hybrids, which tend to go under follow DOT or be dispatched more often than standalone resources. HSL, our high sustainable limit point, and its data quality, how that impacts forecasts, and generally just telemetry quality. So many different factors contributing to real-time solar forecast accuracy trends, and something that we're actively reviewing. And we can go to the next slide. And based on what I just talked about previous, we wanted to highlight what the scheduling coordinators and operators of VERS can do, because data quality is critical to operational forecasting as it informs both the model training and the real-time prediction. And we're finding data quality issues that are impacting some of the forecast performance. So to those scheduling coordinators and operators, providing accurate and up-to-date information about site capacity, including outages and availability of megawatts, is very important. That provides that upper limit or upper cap to forecast so that they can accurately scale the models and provide the best performance, providing meteorological points that are in good quality and consistently reporting, verify meteorological sensors are unobstructed throughout the year, submit telemetry exemptions as appropriate, just communicate where, as soon as possible, any data quality issues so that they can be flagged or removed from forecast prediction if appropriate. And then for the resources providing a high sustainable limit, HSL should be approximately equal to telemetry unless there is supplemental dispatch present. So if you review HSL to telemetry and find that they provide different curves, that should not be the case. We expect that telemetry, and if there's supplemental dispatch, then telemetry plus sub is approximately equal to the HSL points. And then HSL should be unaffected by supplemental dispatch. So HSL really should be the high quality point to use for a lot of resources that go under supplemental dispatch. And we are finding that that is, there's more work to do to get these points there, and would appreciate cooperation and support in that. I think that is my last slide for this section, so I will pause for questions.
If there's any questions, please use the raise hand icon located above your chat window. And I don't see any questions, Sisha, so I think you're cleared.
Great, thank you.
We have two other sections as part of the deck. This one is about energy storage performance, and the next one is about the CAISO wholesale cost. There are really no new items on that deck. It's just an update from the previous deck. So unless there are specific questions, I think we can safely skip that, and it's just a reference for the market participants.
So going to stand by for a few seconds to see if anyone has any questions on energy storage performance or the other slides. Ahmed, do you see any questions in queue?
Currently, no questions in queue.
Great. So if there are no more questions, we'll go ahead and break at this point for lunch, and then we'll return at 1 to resume our call. We'll have the next step on with Becky Robinson on the policy updates. So we'll go ahead and break at this point. Thank you. All right, thank you everyone for joining. We will get started for the Market Performance and Planning Forum update. I would love to introduce Becky Robinson, our Director for Market Policy Development. She will be covering the policy update. Feel free to use the raise hand icon above your chat window. As well, this call is being recorded. Go ahead, Becky.
Great. Thank you, Brenda. Good afternoon, everyone. As Brenda said, I'm Becky Robinson here, and I'm here to provide a policy update. Happy to take any questions as we go along or at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. Thank you. So first item up relates to our extended day-ahead market and day-ahead market enhancements item. As you know, I believe that as of June 11th, our FERC, our EDAM tariff, EDAM and DAME tariff are fully FERC approved. We were really glad to hit that milestone. And then more recently in July, we held the first of the day-ahead market enhancements implementation working groups, a stakeholder meeting to provide for this first one a testing timeline, testing approach, and set expectations on communications and engagement with stakeholders going forward. On the day-ahead market enhancements, as we moved that policy item through board and governing body approval and FERC approval, we had several conversations with stakeholders about how we would be kind of fine-tuning some of the tunable parameters related to the new imbalance reserve product and the day-ahead market enhancements more generally. So we had that first meeting, received stakeholder comments earlier this month. And then Brenda, if we could go to the next slide, we have a timeline kind of showing setting ourselves up for the work to get to EDAM and DAME implementation. So the work shown here for the rest of 2024 and 2025, and then taking us through 2026. And I will note that, from that first meeting and the stakeholder feedback we received, we heard, a desire for stakeholder engagement, more stakeholder engagement sooner. And we are considering that and thinking about how to do that. And so just wanted to share that and more to come on those topics. If we could go to the next slide, please. So next up, we have our Western Energy Imbalance Market Resource Efficiency Evaluation Enhancements. And so the update here is that the Phase 2 Track 2 item, the last of those from the last round of policy, was successfully implemented in July of this year. This was to align, this piece of it was to align market E-tags to the market results to enable identification of lower priority exports in the event that we needed to do post-market curtailments. And it was very helpful in having this functionality enabled, especially in July in the heat of the summer. It was helpful in reducing a source of uncertainty that we had seen in prior summers. And just to note, in July as well, for assistance energy transfers, there were 10 PAs that opted in. That actually, but across those 10, it represents a majority of load served by the energy imbalance market. It was quite a hot month, and so we were glad to have that functionality enabled. And then looking forward to the next round of policy development on resource efficiency evaluation enhancements, a Phase 3 effort. We do still plan to kick that off in Q4 this year. We'll be looking at analysis of recent peak seasons, both summer and winters, to inform that, and stay tuned for more on that coming up. Next slide, please. On price formation enhancements, since the last MPPF, we did receive FERC approval on our changes related to bidding above the soft offer cap, and we implemented that functionality on August 1. It was, while we made the changes that positioned us well for, for the August and September timeframe for summer, we never actually saw conditions that rose to that level to get prices above the $1,000 soft offer cap. But it was nonetheless, we were glad to have that functionality in place in case we did get into those conditions. Sort of another piece of this effort that was related, but sort of independent, related to the maximum import bid price and the shaping factors used to take those 16-hour peak prices and decompose them into hourly prices. We held a stakeholder call on that as a BPM change. And as a follow-up to that, I wanted to let this group know we will be implementing changes to those shaping factors of the max import bid price in Q4 of this year. We've been working on that and just got confirmation of that in recent weeks. So I wanted to share that. In other news and price formation enhancements, oh, sorry, if we could go back to the last slide on price for, thank you. So a separate piece of the price formation enhancements work relates to our big umbrella topics that we've been discussing in those working groups of scarcity pricing, BAA level market power mitigation, and fast start pricing. I wanted to flag for the group that on September 5th, we issued a discussion paper on the next steps on those efforts. And we will have a stakeholder call, I believe, on September 30th to review and discuss that paper. And then the paper talks more about kind of what to expect coming up, but to flag that here, in October, we plan to start some working groups that are really going to get into the market design elements and questions around these topics, specifically on scarcity pricing and BAA level market power mitigation. We want to work with stakeholders in a collaborative way to have to sort of transparently talk through what are the market design pieces of what might go into a straw proposal. So to have that be very interactive and collaborative as we work towards what is that initial policy proposal that we would sort of give shape to with stakeholders. So I wanted to advertise that and invite you all to please, keep an eye out for those working groups to continue the work on price formation enhancements. We'll also be continuing working groups on fast start pricing as well. But we'd like to sort of group scarcity pricing and BAA level market power mitigation together as a kind of a joint package to think about those, they kind of push and pull in different directions. So we like the idea of having those as a package. And I think that reflects good stakeholder feedback as well, while we're continuing the conversation on fast start pricing separately, but sort of putting together a schedule that's moving all of those items forward. All right, next slide, please. Okay, next item up relates to our rules of conduct. And this item related to penalty enhancements, demand response, investigation, and tolling. This is an item that we will be taking to the board and governing body later this month, requesting their approval on this policy initiative. So the proposal here has a few elements. The first is that we are establishing a materiality threshold before we would impose penalties on meter data inaccuracies. So inaccuracies less than 3% or 3 megawatt hours over the course of the day will not be considered a tariff violation and they will not receive a penalty. The second piece of the proposal is that we are creating a timeline and set of requirements around demand response monitoring data that doesn't exist today, but that structure will mirror the timeline and requirements around and penalties around meter data submissions. So this demand response monitoring data, it's the data that we need to sort of create the baseline that we would later measure demand response performance against. And but that should, as I said, sort of set it up to align with the timelines for meter data penalties. And then finally, there's a few areas of administrative burden that we've identified and some opportunity for improvements to our rules. The first is relates to the tolling piece of this, where we have found that there is a tariff violation and for a penalty, we would provide for a 30-day period where the scheduling coordinator could, if they so choose, appeal that penalty to FERC. And if they do so within that 30-day period, we would let the FERC process play out before actually collecting the dollars of that penalty. This is so that would avoid sort of the money changing hands coming to us with potentially us needing to refund that depending on the outcome of that FERC proceeding. So that's just sort of an efficiency where we just wait to let the FERC process play out before any dollars actually change hands on the penalties. The second administrative burden is that we would shorten the investigative process from our side at the ISO from being a 3-letter process to consolidating some of that and having it be a 2-letter process. And then finally, as it relates to our federal power marketing administrations, we would eliminate a report that the TARE provides for today, where we send a letter to the Secretary of Energy if there are meter data late submissions or inaccuracies. So we are comfortable getting rid of that sort of additional reporting. And as I said before, but this will be going to the Board of Governors and governing body for decision later this month. Next slide, please. So next up, our Greenhouse Gas Coordination Working Group has been moving forward with their work efforts. The first point I'd like to highlight is that as it relates to states with non-priced GHG reduction policies, the working group continues to collaborate with stakeholders, but is moving forward to really kind of get into the nuts and bolts of policy design, market design, well, policy design, I should say, on an out-of-market accounting and reporting approach. This was initially introduced by WPTF. It's gotten a lot of stakeholder support as being a helpful tool to help them with their GHG compliance obligations going forward. So we are working through the working group with stakeholders on an issue paper that will be published. We're targeting later this fall, and we'll be continuing those design discussions in upcoming working groups. Other topics on the GHG working group agenda include metrics, where we have started publishing the average GHG emissions rates. We've put out some annual reports and are now producing those monthly so that those folks have up-to-date information on that. We've also heard some stakeholder requests for additional metrics that could be helpful to support compliance with different state programs, and we are continuing to consider those with stakeholders. And then finally, in the working group, there's going to be continued review of the GHG design in both the energy imbalance market and in the extended day-ahead market, and the changes that that'll be reflected when that goes live. And with that, next slide, please. So next up, gas resource management. This working group, the team on this has been, we put out a discussion paper back in May with stakeholder recommendations for policy development. We've been working on an issue paper and are targeting publishing that later in September. So stay tuned and look forward to that. Next slide, please. So on storage, we recently, in July, kicked off a new stakeholder initiative related to bid cost recovery and default energy bid enhancements. But really, the first phase of work really has to do just with bid cost recovery, and we'll be getting into the default energy bid enhancements in coming months. But I would highlight that the current rules create two concerns as it relates to storage resources, and that's the current bid cost recovery rules. The first is that storage assets are not necessarily exposed to real-time prices when they deviate from day-ahead schedules, and that sort of is different than what you expect for more typical resources. And then the second concern is that storage assets may have an incentive to bid strategically to maximize combined payments from the market as well as from bid cost recovery. And it's sort of in the name, but their bids impact the bid cost recovery that they do get paid. And so since July, we have held 6 stakeholder meetings. And on earlier this month, September 4th, we published a revised straw proposal that describes and evaluates different potential solutions. Some of these are suggestions that stakeholders offered in those working group meetings or stakeholder meetings, and it's been a really collaborative conversation, and we appreciate the engagement there from stakeholders. But so, as of this revised straw proposal, again, you see sort of in that paper the different proposals, how they would work, different sort of ways of tweaking those. And some initial thoughts on evaluating those in light of sort of the problem we're trying to solve, which is which, as we've dug into those conversations with stakeholders, it is a complex problem. So in the near term, policy efforts are really trying to focus on that second concern of mitigating strategic bidding concerns, to sort of close that, if you will, loophole in the rules, or that possibility for strategic bidding. We're hoping to have something in time for the November Board of Governors and Governing Body meeting to close that possibility. But really, we understand that this is a broader conversation, a bigger conversation, very complex issues, and efforts on this will continue beyond November, even if we are successful, as I hope we are, in bringing a solution to that November joint Board of Governors and Governing Body meeting, because we do need to sort of, I think, take a step back, focus on a holistic review of how bid cost recovery applies to energy storage resources in the first instance. With that, next slide, please. All right, the next item we have up is inter-scheduling coordinator trades in regional markets. So this is another item that we plan to bring to the Board of Governors and Governing Body for approval on later this month. So inter-SC trades is an optional market feature that exists today in the ISO Balancing Authority. It was an item that we had heard some interest in as it relates to EDAM and from energy and balance market entities. There being a desire to extend that functionality into the broader regional market. But it is really, to say what they are, it's an optional market feature. It facilitates settlements of bilateral contracts between scheduling coordinators, but it does not affect in itself the market optimization, schedules, or dispatch that's coming out of the market. And so the proposal is to extend this functionality to the energy and balance market and EDAM areas. I think it's as we looked into it, it seems, that can be done with, it's just extending existing functionality into the broader market. And so we think that should be able to be done along with the EDAM implementation. And as I said before, we'll be bringing this to the Board of Governors and Governing Body later this month, hopefully for approval. Next slide, please. Next up, we have our transmission services and market scheduling priorities item. And this one here, the update really is just that in July, FERC granted our petition for limited waiver as it relates to the resale of Wheeling through priority. We had filed that request for waiver in April, so we were glad to see that waiver granted and come through to delay our implementation of that resale functionality. So we anticipate being able to implement that feature in Q4 this year, I believe in October. And then we are still sort of have as an item on the back burner, if you will, the phase 2, which would be focused on the long-term wheel through priority, and the study and expansion process sort of implicated of that. Again, we have been doing some stakeholder outreach on that, is to ascertain whether that's a near-term priority for anyone. But that is an item that we want to think through the implications of the 2023 interconnection process enhancements, especially given the FERC guidance that that's not a necessary piece of our tariff. But we do want to stay tuned to that, to the potential need for that should that arise. Next slide, please. All right, next up are resource adequacy working groups. We have been iterating with stakeholders a bit on the discussion paper, making sure that that is capturing what the working group has covered and that the scope that stakeholders are interested in the work exploring. And the teams have been working on an issue paper on 3 tracks of issues. The first here on modeling and default standards in our tariff. So loss of load expectation modeling, default PRMs, potential UCAP structure for default counting in collaboration with the PUC's work there and other local regulatory authorities. Track 2 is on outage and substitution processes and availability and performance incentives, really trying to sort of dust off our rules and in that space, look at how they've been working, what the market impacts have been, and thinking about enhancements there. And then track 3 on backstop reform, particularly on, with the goal of increasing the ISO's visibility into available backstop capacity and increasing transparency to stakeholders as well. And then there are a few working group topics that will kind of continue in the conversations, but not necessarily have a lot of airtime in the issue paper coming up, but where there may need to be continued conversations and coordination with stakeholders, and in particular flagging there the last item on continued assessment of interoperability with existing and emerging RA programs such as RAP. Next slide, please. And then finally, we have a slide here on our policy initiatives catalog and roadmap. So in July, we released the final discretionary policy initiatives catalog, which reflects the stakeholder submissions that were received and priorities that we heard from stakeholders, not just in the submissions, but in sort of taking stock of here's everything that was submitted. Now, what do stakeholders think about those in terms of how they rank in terms of priorities? That will be an input into the policy roadmap, which is our work plan for future policy initiatives. We plan to publish a draft policy roadmap in October, and hopefully finalizing that by the end of the year for a final policy roadmap. And then come January, we will begin this process again with a 2025 catalog and roadmap development and asking again for stakeholder submissions of policy initiative proposals in January. So with that, next slide. I think here we've got our diagram of our typical policy initiative process and the various steps of that. And then the next slide. Here we have our high-level depiction of where various policy efforts are in their life cycle. And we've just talked through most of these, if not all of them. And we have one more slide continuing the list of these policy initiatives. And with that, I think that's all I have. So I will pause and see if there are any questions.
No questions in the room, Becky. I don't see any on the WebEx. I also wanted to add a link of our policy initiatives timeline that we provide on behalf of the stakeholder affairs that would help our attendees kind of visually see it. Also the same diagram. And so we update that document also weekly. So I went ahead and added that link to the chat window.
That's great. Thank you, Brenda, for doing that. I appreciate that.
I did see a question from Alva from PG&E. Let's go ahead and unmute Alva.
This is Alva. Can you hear me? Great. Thank you. Thank you for all of this information. Really appreciate it. Wondering about both in terms of the price formation enhancements, straw proposal development, and also in terms of the roadmap, when might other sort of initiatives be announced and come on to this plan. Do you see that? Look, for example, when the roadmap paper is published, does that sort of become an announcement of some additional items that you'll be working on, or how do you see that folding into what you've got here so far?
I think so. I think that's a good way of thinking about it. And thanks for the question, Alva. I expect from our initial conversations internally, so this may change, but happy to kind of try and shed some light on it, because I know there were a lot of submissions to the catalog, and so sort of like how are we thinking about adding those to our existing work streams? So I think there are likely to be a couple of new stakeholder initiative efforts that need to get started up, where sort of there's not conversations necessarily happening today. But given the items on the catalog and that may flow through into the roadmap, we may say this needs, we just need to start a new group talking about these particular issues. So I think there may be one or two of those, and I'm thinking of these in terms of buckets of issues that came through via the catalog. But I think there may also be some buckets of issues where, for instance, some items that may relate to storage or hybrid resources, we may sort of, surface that on the roadmap to say, okay, here's some issues that were raised in part of the catalog that we think warrant, looking into and so forth. But we may try and funnel those into an ongoing work stream and an ongoing set of stakeholder meetings. For instance, the storage conversations we have going on today as it relates to bid cost recovery. Now, I wouldn't expect necessarily that group to say, okay, let's stop what we're doing on bid cost recovery and look at these catalog items. But I think that may be the right group of stakeholders to consider those catalog issues and say, how do we want to fold these into our ongoing work? Or can we do that? Or do we really need a separate group to sort of focus on any of these issues? So storage there is an example, but I think that could also be true of the resource adequacy working groups, maybe price formation enhancements, and some others as well, where there may be kind of I'll say a natural home or a natural group of stakeholders who are already meeting, where we can, I'll say, add this to their list of work for that group to consider, to say, should we fold it into what we're doing right now? Should we parking lot this and sort of take that up and at what point? So that's how I've been thinking about it, but happy to get any feedback from you on initial reactions to that, Alva.
I think that makes a lot of sense. It's just good to know that some of these, like for example, as you described the storage BCR, which seems like a fairly limited issue, even though it's a very important issue in terms of that there could be some deliberate scope increase there, because you already have identified who's some core stakeholders, and others obviously may join in on that as new things come up. So I think that's a good approach. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you, Alva.
I don't see any more questions in queue. I think we're good. Thank you, Becky.
Okay. Thank you, Brenda. Thanks, everyone.
At this time, I'll go ahead and introduce Trang Vo. Do a
Thank
quick
you, Brenda.
We can hear you.
I'm here. Okay, great. Thank you. Good afternoon. This is Trang Vo, Release Manager in the Project Management team, to provide a release plan update. So just as a notification, we do have the release user group every other week on Tuesdays at 10, and you can tune into those for release plan updates outside of the market participant and planning forum. So the next one's October 1st, and we'll continue to provide periodic updates on the release plan and implementation updates. Good. Okay, so Brenda, can I move the slides on my own? Okay.
Yes. Yes, let's go ahead and have Trang presentation, right? Wait 1 second.
All right. It looks like I'm there. Okay, great. Thank you. So as usual, we'll start with the release plan summary. So we have the fall 2024 settlements release. There are no project changes as part of that settlements release. Those are all production fixes. And then we have the independent 2024 releases, so still quite a list for the rest of this year. We have FERC 2222, the application delivery resiliency, the final API cutover, and activation of AUP. When we have TSMSP 2 for the resale scope, FERC 2023 for generator interconnection lifecycle, the CRR upgrade, highest emergency rating, the WEIM fab enhancements, hybrid resources phase 2C for RIMS, transmission exchange agreement. I'll actually be moving that out to 2025. And then FERC 881. And then we have a couple of new items here for enabling NGRs to participate in inter-SC trades or ISTs. And then the modification of maximum import bid price or MIBP hourly energy shaping factor. And spring 2026, we have DAME and EDAM, as well as the EDAM ISO-BA participation rules, and then the EDAM onboarding, and then the WEIM onboarding. And then for future releases, we have the subscriber PTO model, and then the settlements upgrade. Okay, so I'll go ahead and move on to another general update on BRS commenting. So we initiated a new process to solicit feedback on BRSs, and we will continue to track what's available for commenting and what's upcoming, and then just any other developments related to this. So for comment periods that have closed, we have subscriber PTO for 2222, and then the EDAM ISO-BA participation rules version 1. So you'll see an update there that for FERC 2222, we did get some comments that we responded to, and so the responses are published on the stakeholder page. So please take a look at that and let us know if there are more questions. We do have 3 open comment periods for BRSs. So we extended the DAME and EDAM BRS commenting period through the end of this month for version 1.3 of the BRS or anything up until that point. And then we have just opened the EDAM ISO-BA participation rules BRS 1.2 commenting period, and that's open for 3 weeks and closing on October 9th. And we do have an upcoming BRS revision for EDAM ISO-BA participation rules, and I'll have more details on that. And once we publish that version of the BRS, we'll have another comment period for that as well. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move forward to the fall 2024 release for settlements. So we have, as of September 4th, published the latest scope that you see here. So for FERC 2222, you'll see that there are no settlements changes, and then the rest of the items are for production fixes. So we have COTP loss with an effective date of 11/1, RC config changes with an effective date 11/1, and then the RAME LESR change for settlements will be retroactive to March 1st, 2023. And you can refer to the settlements calendar for the publication of any of the changes that are the recalcs that you'll see this retroactive change for settlements on. And then on the next slide, we also have RMR changes effective 11/1, BD name changes effective 11/1, and then another production defect for T versus S 11/1 effective date. And then for TSMSP2, we have a change for that project, but it's related to the scope that went in and activated as of June 1st. So that change is effective with a retroactive date of June 1st as well. Okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the milestones. And so we have posted the first and second draft config output files. We also have the PRRs published for settlements for the settlements release. We did just start the market sim and sample statement window in the MapStage environment for the settlements release. So that started on Monday, and our first settlements trade date is Tuesday was yesterday for 9/17, and that will publish on Tuesday 9/24 for the daily initial. So that'll be the first sample statement published for the settlements released in the map stage environment. And then we have the pre-prod config output file and production activation dates below as well for October 23rd and November 1st. All right, so I'll go ahead and move on to our independent releases. So I'll cover just the significant updates of items completed since the last release plan update and or upcoming items. So as I mentioned here for the BRSs, we did receive comments and we published our responses to those. So those are available now. And then when we move down to the BPM, you'll see that we have PRRs 1586 for market instruments published and then 1588 for demand response. So we do also have in the queue PRRs for generator management as well as market operations. We'll have an upcoming procedure update for 5330. And then the market simulation did start for 2222 with connectivity of 2 weeks, and then the execution of the unstructured scenarios will start September 30. And production is on track for November 1st. All right, so I'll go ahead and move on to the API cutover and then the activation of AUP on those new APIs. So we're still continuing our effort to ensure that all of the users of the production APIs are transitioned to the new URLs so that we can proceed with the cutover. So we still have just just a handful of users that need to transition, and then once we have that resolved, then we will plan a date for the transition and we'll communicate that out. So no other changes to the scope of this. It's just more making sure that our customers are ready. All right, so I'll go ahead and move on to TSMSP2. So for this one, for the BRS, we did publish the BRS for resale. This BRS for resale is developed, but it's still pending the final review and plan to publish by the end of this week. And then we have an upcoming OASIS tech spec that's planned for the resale scope as well, planned for this month. And then the activation for the resale scope and production is planned for October 31st. And the market simulation will plan to start October 7th through the 21st. Okay, so I'll move on to generator interconnection lifecycle. So for this one, the most significant update here is the resource interconnection standards fair that was yesterday. So hopefully all those that were interested and participated got a lot out of that. And for upcoming activities, we do have PRRs and BPM changes that are in the queue, but those are going to be pending the FERC approval. And then you could see the production schedule and milestones there, no changes to those. All right, so next we have CRR upgrades. And for this, the next customer partnership group is on the calendar for Thursday, September 26th. That is tentative at this time, so stay tuned for notices once we finalize the presentation, the agenda, and the meeting. This is the latest timeline from the August CPG. And then again, these are just reminders to participate in the technical user group and the CRR customer partnership group for more detailed information. And then as we are getting close to the market simulation, starting at the end of October, then we will also be covering this in more detail on the twice weekly market simulation calls as well on Mondays and Thursdays. Okay, and for reference, I'm not going to go over in detail, but we do have a couple of different calendars that have been presented in the CPG and discussed. We have the proposed CRR monthly and annual market sim plan, as well as the draft of the 2024 and 2025 allocation and auction markets calendar. So the market simulation will have 1 week of connectivity followed by 2 weeks of structured simulation and 3 weeks of unstructured simulation. So that information is here. And then we also have from November 2024 through the February calendar as well for the production activities. So I'll move on to now to highest emergency rating. So we did have some delays in this implementation. So the latest milestone was that the tech specs and those had been published since August for the OMS changes. And then we do have training and market simulation coming up. So the latest schedule is that we anticipate starting the market simulation early November. And so we would plan to have the training late October prior to the market simulation. And for production, we're still planning an implementation this year and activation of those changes this year in Q4. So move on now so this is the reference for OMS. And then I'll cover the FAB enhancements or the WEIM enhancements. So there are a total of 5 items listed in the BRS. The first item for congestion management full transparency is done, and we are continuing work on the remaining 4. So we have some reference slides here for congestion management transparency. Again, this was implemented in June of 2024 and has a few UIs that were impacted there. And then the next item that we have is the external WEIM commitment override. So for this, the market simulation is planned for October 2024 for a couple weeks. So those that are interested can participate and get a hands-on look at the BAYOP UI changes for the external WEIM commitment override. And we'll announce when that will be available as we get a little bit closer. For system net ITC definitions from the ISO BA side and then also the WEIM side, we are, the ISO is currently testing, and then we don't have a target date for that yet, but there is a lot of testing in progress and on the ISO side for this. And then upcoming, we have dynamic ETSR limits changes. All right, so I'll go ahead and move on now to hybrid resources 2C for RIMS. Okay, so we have a market simulation coming up in November for this related to shapefiles. And then we also have more information to provide in the release user group and a technical user group for the shapefiles to prepare for that market simulation. And for production, this is still planned for 2024 Q4. So we're looking at December now after the November market simulation activities. Okay. All right. And for TEA, I will be moving this out to 2025. So a few changes here. So we did revise the version of the BRS that was previously provided to WAPA. And when we did that, we also posted the latest BRS onto the release planning page. So although this is specific to WAPA, others can review the BRS and let us know if there are any questions and just have more information on this implementation. The market simulation is moved to February 2025 at this time. And for production, we have activation as TBD, just depending on the final market simulation schedule and outcome. So there may be some deployments that happen prior to the activation that will go inactive into production, but I'll provide more transparency into those production activities as we get a little bit closer. And then for FERC 881, we still have in the queue the revision of the Track 2 BRS. And then for Track 2, you'll see that we still have that plan for 2024 through 2025. And for reference, here's the FERC 881 timeline. Okay, so let's go to the new items. So when we implemented price formation enhancements, as Becky mentioned earlier, for August 1st, 2024, There was also this other effort that was underway. So we had, again, on May 28th, the MIBP workshop. And as a result of that, we are modifying the MIBP energy price hourly shaping factor. So that will result in an update to the market instruments BPM with the latest. And then for production activation right now, we're tracking towards middle of November. And so that's, so we did announce that earlier. I just wanted to provide an update on where we are with that. And then the next new item that we have is enabling NGRs to participate in ISTs. So this is an item, so it is different. This is a separate effort from this is a separate effort from the Inter-SC Trades and Regional Markets Policy Initiative that Becky also covered. So this specific item is enabling NGRs to participate in physical trades. This came from the 2024 Annual Policy Initiatives Roadmap process under the storage category, and then I have links to the submission there for those that want to review that in more detail. We have the summary and description here, and the presentation is linked, and we anticipate just cyber impacts here. So below you'll see the upcoming implementation areas to expect, and then dates will be provided as we make more progress on that. But at this time, we are planning this after the FERC 2222 cyber changes, and then we'll provide more details on the timeline as we move forward. So we'll have a market instruments BPM change. We'll also have updates to the cyber release notes and cyber rules. And then we also have a Cyber SC user guide as well as a Cyber IST tutorial that will be updated just to allow NGRs for physical trades. We do have a market simulation planned for this, and then that will lead us into the production activation. Okay.
Trey, we do have 2 questions. They might be asking for the specific portion. Let's go take Alva's hand first.
Trang, this is Alva from PG&E. I really should have looked at this presentation. I didn't realize there was a presentation on this, but is this facility one that allows you to trade both charging and discharging for an NGR, or is it only on the discharge side? I can't tell from the description.
You know, I'm not sure, and my apologies. This slide was not in the earlier version of the presentation, but we'll repost that. And so what I can tell you now while we're reposting that, or maybe Brenda can take the link that I provided there and put it in the chat for the submission and the presentation, and you can review those for now, Alva, to see if that helps, and then I can also take that back to the team and see if I can add anything to this presentation for that. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. And Brenda, was there another question?
Yes. I changed.
Okay.
Yes. Good afternoon, Trang. This is Chen Yu from PG&E. Yeah. Just looking at the independent 2024 list, and I'm just looking from now to end of the year. It's, if I do my math right, it's really only 2.5 months left, not quite. So we do have about 10, looks like, with the new initiative too. I think we have about somewhere from 8 to 10 initiatives that need to be finished by Q4 of this year. I just want to maybe understand from CAISO perspective, what do you think, how reliable that, how achievable it is just to finish all of that? Or is it possibility some of these initiatives going to move to 2025?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, not only on your mind, but probably others and us as well. So at this point, this is our plan, and then there is a chance that items move into 2025. We already see that with the TEA, and there are some other ones that that may shift as well. So I think that maybe what could help provide clarity in the next release user group update is if I provide the clarity on, the first of the month requirement or different annual deadlines and things like that we have for each of these activations, as well as which ones don't have that requirement and are a little bit more flexible. So I can provide more insight into that, and then so that there can be more transparency on the likelihood of things shifting out. But there is a possibility that there may be other things that move forward, and like I said, in the next release user group, I'll provide more information and transparency into which ones of those are more flexible versus which ones have a more priority and urgency for this year.
Right. Thank you. Thanks for going to look into it, because definitely by looking at that, it creates some anxiety here.
Yeah.
And also, I have seen from the policy earlier that talking about some items might also add to 2025. Just thinking about from planning perspective, I mean, looks like CAISO 8 and probably most market participants, it's going to gear up for the DAM and the EDAM. And I just wonder if I'm sure CAISO has considered just like how much more can be added to the plate where we're still able to have a very quality product released to the production. I think that's just a comment. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nope, understood. And that's something that we continuously evaluate too, and make sure that we're focusing again on the right priorities and we have the right resourcing for DAM and EDAM, and to not impact that with the additional work that we have. And I also wanted to make, so I do appreciate that comment, and I also wanted to just mention one other thing too on just the various implementations that we have remaining for 2024 into 2025. So I can provide more clarity also on, kind of what that activation means, because I think that a part of our assessment for implementation is what can we deliver, what functionality can we deliver that is kind of adopt when ready, so that minimizes the impact to our customers too. And so we try to look at it from that perspective. So if, for an example, enabling non-generating resources to participate in inter-SC trades. So we want to make that available, but it shouldn't change your existing processes. And so that's also another frame of reference that we take into consideration as we plan these things and move forward with implementation and potential deferrals as well. So.
Right. Okay. Thanks for the consideration. And yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Great. Brenda, are we clear to move forward?
Yes. Let me make sure. Ahmed, let Trang still be presenter. Thank you.
All right. And thanks for putting the links in for the NGR participation in ISTs. Thank you. Okay, so let's go on to spring 2026 release. We'll start with DAME. And for DAME, the recent updates that we have are the third set of charge codes for those draft config guides were published August for those, and then we sent an announcement for that. And then as Becky mentioned, we had the configurable parameters implementation working group in August, and we did receive a lot of comments there, and we appreciate the participation. And as I just want to echo again what Becky said, which is that we did hear loud and clear customers' desire to be engaged earlier and more often, and so we're taking a look at that, and then we will report back on what we can provide. Okay, all right, and that's it for DAME. So go ahead and move on to EDAM. So same settlements update for EDAM, which is the third set of draft config guides were published. And we continue to work through the implementation internally with no other updates to report at this time for the milestones. Okay. All right. So I'll move on. We have just some reference activation timelines and EDAM onboarding milestones. So the next slide we have is for EDAM ISO/BA participation rules, track A. So I'll go here to the milestones. So we do have some updates here. So first, we're making more consistent and accurate our term for the revenue, recoverable revenue. So you'll see that that referred to as EDAM recoverable revenue for CAISO BAA. So what we have upcoming is going to be some draft tariff language, a stakeholder meeting, and a FERC filing related to the EDAM recoverable revenue for CAISO BAA. And then for the BRSs, we did publish version 1.2, and you'll see the changes there. There are 4 different areas, and then we did open up comments for 3 weeks on that version of the BRS. And then once we have more information about the EDAM recoverable revenue area, then we will have another version of the BRS published to show those. And those should be just augmenting the existing versions of the BRS and not really modifying the current existing requirements that are published up to version 1.2. For settlements config guides, again, we posted the third set of draft config guides. And when we did that, we also posted revised draft config guides for the second set of charge codes. And one thing to note here is that those config guides, they do include the EDAM ISO/BA participation rules settlements changes, even though we still have some draft tariff changes, BRS upcoming and FERC filing upcoming for that area. The settlements changes are included in the post-draft config guides that are published. And so we wanted to make sure that customers were aware of that and just know that there may be additional changes to the draft config guides for settlements as we make progress on, again, the BRS and draft tariff language and FERC filing for the EDAM recoverable revenue. Okay. And then no other changes to this. So I'll go ahead and move forward. WEIM BHG Montana, the next update that we'll see is going to be more than a year from now where we start the market simulation. All right, for future releases, we have subscriber PTO, and this is, we don't have a timeline and implementation timeline finalized for this yet. But you can see the impact that is here. And the last milestone was, again, the BRS publishing on July 26th, and that comment period has closed, and we don't have any responses to publish from that comment period. So if there is a revision, then we will open up another comment period for that. And then the last item is the settlement upgrade project. So we are still working on baselining the schedule, or rebaselining the schedule for this, and we did commit to quarterly updates for the settlement upgrade project. The next one will be in October. So no changes to this as of now. Okay. Then again, the next release user group will be Tuesday, October 1st at 10 a.m. Pacific, where we'll cover the latest release plan updates. Okay, Brenda, do we have any other questions or comments?
Let me see really quick. Any questions and comments? We'll be updating the slide deck hopefully this afternoon for those who are seeing the little bit of minor differences for Trang's presentation. We'll have that updated today and including a few updates from Becky's as well. But I don't see any questions in the queue. We are also having that CRCPG call next week on the 26th. So feel free to join that. We'll have a notice be sent out tomorrow morning for that. But I think we're good from our end. Hi, Trang, we can't hear you in case you're speaking.
No, thank you, Brenda. I think that's back to you then.
Awesome. So I'll go ahead and continue wrapping up this call. Next time we will meet again on Q4 will be December 15th. We'll send out a notice a month ahead of time. At this, I apologize, December 12th. We'll let everyone know on that meeting that's coming up. And then for our upcoming updates, the only one I could share is that we do have the stakeholder symposium coming up in October with the welcome reception October 29th at the Kempton Sawyer Hotel, followed by the symposium program on October 30th. We look forward to registrants as they continue registering at this time and our sponsors. So if you are looking to do sponsorship, please let us know soon. We definitely want to have time for any prints, logos that will be added within the sponsorship package that you select. At this time, thanks so much to our speakers, presenters, our guests that attended this call. This call is recorded and will be posted shortly this week, as well as that presentation will be updated this afternoon for folks to follow back and review any items. But feel free to send us any emails back to the ISO Stakeholder Affairs at CAISO.com, or you can email them to myself, Brenda Marquez, for bmarquez@CAISO.com. And thanks so much. I will go ahead and close this call and take care. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for using Event Services. You may now disconnect.